Damian Whitmore didn't knock. That was the first thing Amara Bennett noticed, the way he walked into spaces like he already owned them. Like permission was something other people needed. He appeared at the end of the boarding gate corridor, with his carry-on luggage rolling behind him, and his eyes scanning the crowd the way a man scans a room he's already decided belongs to him. When his gaze landed on Amara, he didn't smile. He just stopped walking and tilted his head, that slow, deliberate tilt that her mother called distinguished, and that made Amara's stomach turn to cold water every single time. Amara. He said her name like it was a business asset he was confirming on a balance sheet. She was already moving toward her boarding group, already pretending she hadn't seen him, but crossed the distance in 6 strides and touched her arm just above the elbow. Not gentle, not aggressive, possessive. The grip of a man who had practiced the exact amount of pressure required to stop a woman without technically doing anything wrong. "Your mother said you'd be on this flight," he said. Of course she did. Amara looked at his hand on her arm. Then she looked up at his face, and she thought not for the first time that Damian Whitmore was the kind of dangerous that didn't look dangerous at all. "I didn't know you were coming to the wedding," she said carefully. He smiled then. "I wasn't invited, but your mother thought it would be a good opportunity for us." For us. As if there was an us. As if 2 years of her family's relentless pressure and his patient, calculated pursuit had already sealed something she had never agreed to. That was the moment, standing in that boarding gate corridor, with his hand on her arm and her heart slamming against her ribs, that Amara Bennett made a decision that would change her entire life. If you've ever had someone make decisions about your future without asking you first, if you know what it feels like to smile and stay quiet when every part of you is screaming, then this story is for you. Stay with us. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. And drop like then. Tell us in the comments what city or country you're watching from. This story has already reached people in places I never imagined, and I want to see exactly how far it travels. Because what happens next at 35,000 feet over the Atlantic, nobody saw coming. Not even him. Kang Seong-hyun had been awake for 31 hours. He didn't advertise this fact. He didn't advertise anything. That was the first rule he'd learned, not from school. Not from his father, but from the men who ran the underground networks in Seoul's shadow economy, the men who had recruited a 19-year-old kid with sharp eyes and no family connections and decided he was useful. Rule 1, never let them see the cost. Let them see the result. The result tonight was a man in a charcoal suit that had cost more than most people's monthly salaries, sitting in a commercial economy seat because his assistant had booked him onto the wrong flight, and his private aircraft was currently in Zurich. He hadn't raised his voice about this. He had simply looked at his assistant with the particular stillness that made grown men suddenly need to check their phones, and then he had taken the economy boarding pass and walked to the gate. Seat 24B, middle seat. Seong-hyun couldn't remember the last time he had sat in a middle seat. He wasn't sure he ever had. His whole adult life had been built around never being. In the middle, always the head of the table, always the end of the row, always the position that allowed him to watch everything without being trapped between 2 strangers. He settled into the seat, folded his jacket across his lap, and opened his phone to review the Baekrion Holdings quarterly security brief that his head of operations had sent at 2 a.m. The brief contained 4 flagged incidents, 2 competitor movements in the Incheon logistics corridor, and a single line at the bottom that his head of operations always added, not because it was necessary, but because he knew Seong-hyun would look for it. No direct threats. "You can breathe." Seong-hyun almost smiled at that. Almost. He was on a flight to his younger brother's wedding in Amsterdam, a wedding he had almost not attended because attending required him to be absent from Seoul for 6 days, and 6 days was a long time in his world. Things moved. People moved. The balance of fear and respect that kept his organization functioning required constant, quiet attention, the way a very large fire required a man who never fully slept. But Dae-jung had called him personally, not through the assistant, not through email. He had called at 11 at night and said, without preamble, "Hyung, I need you there, not the chairman you." Seong-hyun had stared at his office ceiling for a long time after that call. Then he had told his assistant to book the flight. He was thinking about that, about the difference between the chairman and you, and whether he still knew what that distinction meant when the woman sat down next to him. She was carrying too much. That was the first thing he noticed. A laptop bag, a canvas tote with something that looked like rolled paper sticking out of it, a jacket bundled under one arm, and a water bottle she was gripping with the focused intensity of someone who needed something to hold on to. She wedged herself into seat 24C with a small exhale that wasn't quite a sigh and wasn't quite relief, and immediately began trying to organize her belongings in the overhead bin with the systematic efficiencies of someone who had survived many disorganized travel days. She dropped the water bottle. It bounced off the armrest between them and landed against his knee. Seong-hyun looked at it. Then he picked it up and held it out without looking at her. "Thank you," she said, and her voice was slightly breathless. "Sorry, I'm a little scattered right now." He didn't respond. He returned to his phone. For the next 4 minutes, she got herself settled. He was aware of this the way he was always aware of everything around him. The habit of attention was too deep to switch off, but he didn't look at her again. The boarding was still in progress. The economy cabin was filling with the particular noise of people negotiating overhead space and middle armrests, and the eternal question of whether the stranger beside you was going to spend the flight watching a movie at full volume. Then she leaned toward him. Not all the way. She left 6 inches of respectful distance. But she leaned, and when she spoke, her voice was low and deliberate, like someone choosing words very carefully under pressure. "I'm going to ask you something strange," she said. "And I need you to not say anything for about 5 seconds after I ask it." Seong-hyun lowered his phone. He looked at her directly for the first time. She was watching him with eyes that were calculating and exhausted, in equal measure, the eyes of someone who had been running a problem through their mind from multiple angles and had settled on the least bad option. She had a small scar above her left eyebrow, barely visible. Her hands were steady. He noticed that a person could control their voice and their face, but hands were harder, and hers were still. "Go ahead," he said. She took one breath. "If anyone asks." She said, "You're my husband." The 5 seconds passed. He looked at her. She looked back. "You have lost your mind," he said. "I know how it sounds." She shifted fractionally in her seat, not backward, not retreating, which surprised him. "But I have about 90 seconds before the man 3 rows ahead of us notices I'm not in first class where I was to be, and when he does, he's going to come back here, and I need there to be a reason he can't." "Who is he?" "The man my family has been trying to get me to marry for 2 years." She said it flat. No self-pity, just the weight of a fact she had been carrying for a long time. "His name is Damian Whitmore. He is charming and connected and very accustomed to getting what he wants, and my mother told him which flight we were on without telling me. And I have been trying to figure out how to survive 10 hours in a pressurized tube with both of them since I saw him at the gate." Seong-hyun processed this. "And your solution," he said slowly, "is to tell a stranger that he's your husband." "You're not just a stranger," she gestured vaguely at the seat. "You're a stranger in a suit who looks like the kind of person people don't argue with. No offense." He looked at her for a long moment. He had sat across from prosecutors, rival organization heads, government officials with their carefully worded threats, and men who had put weapons on tables during negotiations. He had an extremely accurate internal gauge for the difference between someone playing an angle and someone who's simply, honestly desperate. She was desperate, but she wasn't lying to him. She was asking him directly, with full acknowledgement that the request was absurd, and she was leaving the decision entirely with him. That was unusual. "Your mother is on this flight," he said. 4 rows ahead. "Yes. And she doesn't know you invented a husband." "She does not know I invented a husband. And the man you're avoiding. First class. He'll come back when he figures out I rerouted." Seong-hyun exhaled once through his nose. "What's my name?" he asked. Something in her face shifted, not relief. Exactly. More like a person releasing a breath they'd been holding underwater. "What? If you're going to tell me I'm your husband, I need a name. Unless you've already invented one, in which case I need to know it before he gets here." She stared at him. Then, very quietly, I said you were Korean. I said your name was Hyun. I didn't have a last name yet. Kang, he said. Kang Seong-hyun used the full name. Amara, she said. Amara Bennett. Kang, she tried it. Amara Kong, a pause. That actually sounds real. Most true things do. She almost smiled. It was small, and it was complicated, and it disappeared almost immediately. But Seong-hyun caught it, the way he caught everything completely, without showing that he had. Then Damien Whitmore appeared at the curtain between first class and economy. He was exactly what Seong-hyun had expected. From the description, the suit was correct. The correct. The expression was the particular blend of patient and proprietary that men with inherited money and no checked ego wore as default. Came down the aisle with his eyes already on Amara, the way a person approaches something they consider theirs. He stopped at row 24. He looked at Amara, then he looked at Seong-hyun, then back at Amara, and there was a beat, a very small beat, where something passed through his expression. Not uncertainty. More like a recalculation, Amara, he said. The same way he'd said it at the gate. A business confirmation. Damien. Her voice was level. Seong-hyun gave her credit for that. Your seat was in first class. I made sure. I know, she didn't explain further. Damien's eyes moved to Seong-hyun with the particular attention of a man who has just noticed an unexpected variable. I don't believe we've met. Seong-hyun looked at him. He didn't introduce himself immediately. He let the silence run for 3 full seconds, long enough to be deliberate, short enough that Damien couldn't call it rude, and then he said, with the calm of a man reading a quarterly report, Kang Seong-hyun, Amara's husband. Damien's smile stayed on his face. But the warmth went out of it. I wasn't aware Amara was married. No, Seong-hyun said. You weren't. We haven't had a chance to. Damien started, directing this at Amara. We eloped, Amara said. The word came out cleaner than Seong-hyun expected. No hesitation, no upward inflection. 8 months ago. We've been keeping it quiet. His family situation is complicated. Damien looked at her hands, at the absence of a ring. Seong-hyun watched this happen and understood immediately. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket smoothly, without urgency, and removed his own ring. It was a simple platinum band he'd worn for years. On his right hand, a piece his brother had given him when Seong-hyun had helped him through a very bad period at 23. He transferred it to his left hand without comment. He did not look at Amara while he did this, but he felt her go completely still beside him. Damien looked at the ring. The recalculation in his expression became more visible now. He was a man who was very good at reading power, and whatever he was reading from the man in seat 24B was making him take one small, unconscious half-step backward. Well, Damien said finally, this is a surprise. Many things are, Seong-hyun said. A beat. I'll leave you to it then. Damien's voice was smooth, but his smile was working harder now, the way a machine works harder when the load is heavier. He looked at Amara one more time, and in that look was something that Seong-hyun catalogued and filed away, because he recognized it. It was the look of a man who hasn't given up, who has simply changed the timeline. We'll talk later, Damien said to Amara. Safe flight, she said. He turned and walked back toward the curtain. The moment he was through it, Amara sat back in her seat and Seong-hyun watched the effort it cost her to keep her breathing even. Your ring, she said quietly. You didn't have to. If we're doing this, we're doing it correctly. She turned and looked at him. Really looked at him, maybe for the first time since she'd sat down not as a stranger she was running a calculation on, but as the specific person he actually was. He was aware of this shift in attention the way he was aware of most things, completely, without reacting to it. Why are you helping me? She asked. It was a fair question. He'd been asking himself the same one. I'm going to my brother's wedding, he said. I haven't slept in 31 hours. I was not looking forward to 10 hours in a middle seat. He paused. This is more interesting. She stared at him for another moment. Then she said, that's a terrible reason. Yes, he agreed. And somehow he didn't plan it, didn't engineer it, she laughed. It was short and startled. and genuine, the laugh of a person who wasn't expecting to find anything funny. And it was the first sound on that entire aircraft that managed to break through the static of 31 hours of noise in Seong-hyun's head. He looked out the window at the tarmac. The plane began to move. In the 4 rows ahead of them, a woman in a carefully pressed blazer sat with her hands folded in her lap, watching the runway with the particular slowness of someone who was not, actually, watching the runway. When the boarding had finished, Claudette Bennett had done a single, quiet visual sweep of the economy cabin. She had found her daughter. She had found the man beside her daughter. She had registered the ring on the left hand that had not been there before. And then she had turned back to the window, and the expression on her face, not visible to anyone, not meant for anyone, was complicated in a way that only a mother's expressions get to be. The plane lifted. Amara exhaled beside him a long, slow release, like pressure escaping, and for one moment she closed her eyes, and in the half-second, before she composed herself again, Seong-hyun saw what she actually looked like when she wasn't performing strength for anyone. She was tired, not the tired of a long travel day. The other kind. The kind that lives deeper than sleep can reach. Away before she opened her eyes. He pulled out the security brief again and stared at it without reading it, because something had shifted in the architecture of this particular Tuesday in a way he hadn't accounted for. And Kang Seong-hyun did not like variables he hadn't accounted for. Except, and this was the part he couldn't explain, the part that would have concerned his head of operations greatly, he was not, actually, displeased. The cabin lights dimmed as they climbed through clouds. "Okay," Amara said quietly, turning to him. "We need a story." "We need details," he corrected. "A story is what people tell when they're inventing things. Details are what make something believable." She considered this. Fine, details. "How did we meet?" She thought for a moment. "Bookstore. You were looking at the wrong shelf. I don't read. You were looking for someone's gift." He turned this over. "Whose?" "Your brother's." She nodded to herself. "You were trying to find something for your brother's birthday, and you picked up a marine biology textbook because the cover had ocean photography, and you thought it was art." Seong-hyun looked at her. "That's very specific," he said. "Details," she said, with a small, careful edge that might have been humor. He was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, Seoul was disappearing beneath the cloud line. "What's the book?" he said. She blinked. "What?" "The one I picked up." "What's the actual title?" She leaned down, pulled the canvas tote from under the seat in front of her, and removed a worn paperback. She held it up. "The Deep, the Extraordinary Creatures of the Abyss." He looked at it. "You carry this on flights." "I carry it everywhere. No apology. I teach marine biology. 10th grade. My students like when I have visual references." He took the book from her. She let him, with a slight surprised pause, and looked at the cover. A bioluminescent creature, blue-white and strange, photographed against absolute darkness. He turned it over and read the back. "The anglerfish," he said, "generates its own light specifically to attract prey." "Yes, so the light is a trap." She looked at him with a new kind of attention. Most people ask if anglerfish are real. Most people waste their first questions. She took the book back, held it against her chest for a moment, with both hands unconsciously, like returning something to its correct position. Then she looked at the seat pocket in front of her and said, quietly, "We met at a bookstore in Itaewon. You were holding this book upside down." Seong-hyun looked back at his security brief. 8 months ago, he said. 7, she said. "We're newlyweds, but not the embarrassing kind." "No," he agreed. "Not that kind." The brief blurred in front of him, unreread. In the seat pocket ahead, Claudette Bennett's hand rested on a small envelope, a letter she had been carrying for 3 weeks, a letter she had written to her daughter and had not yet found the right moment to give her. She stared at the clouds. Behind her, in seat 24C, a woman who had spent 3 years being slowly convinced she wanted. The wrong thing sat next to a man who had spent 20 years being slowly convinced he needed nothing. The plane leveled out at cruising altitude. Neither of them said anything for a while. And somehow, in the silence, neither of them was entirely alone. The silence between them lasted exactly 14 minutes. Seong-hyun knew because He had been watching the flight tracker on the small screen embedded in the seat back ahead of him, not because he cared about the distance remaining, but because his mind needed something to grip, something measurable. The tiny animated plane crawled across the digital map with the unhurried certainty of a thing that had no doubts about where it was going. And he watched it with the focused attention of a man who was actively not thinking about the woman sitting 6 inches to his left. Amara had her book open on her lap. He wasn't sure she was actually reading it. Her eyes moved across the page at intervals that were too irregular for genuine reading, stopping, backing up, stopping again. Her right hand was flat against the open page, like she was holding it down against wind, even though the cabin air was completely still. He returned to his phone. The security brief had 3 flagged incidents. The first was a territory dispute in the Mapo district that his lieutenant had already handled with the particular efficiency Seong-hyun paid him for. The second was a surveillance notation a government vehicle had been observed near the Baekryong Holdings satellite office in Busan for the 3rd consecutive week. Not unusual, not yet, but the frequency had changed, and frequency was how quiet things became loud things if you weren't watching. The third incident was a personnel matter that would require a direct conversation when he landed, involving a mid-level manager who had been skimming from a distribution account in amounts small enough to think were invisible. They were never invisible. Seong-hyun closed the brief without responding to any of it. His head of operations would wait. He had learned to wait with the patience of someone who understood that the chairman's silence was not absence, it was processing. "You're not actually reading that," Amara said. He looked up. She was watching him now, the book closed in her lap with her finger, marking a page somewhere near the middle. Her voice wasn't accusatory. It was the tone of someone making an observation they've already verified internally, before saying aloud. "Neither are you," he said. She glanced down at the book. "Back up. I've read this chapter 6 times. It's about deep-sea pressure. How creatures adapt to conditions that should kill them." She paused. "I read it when I'm stressed. It doesn't actually help, but the repetition does something." He considered this, like counting, more like proof, that something can survive conditions it wasn't designed for. She set the book in the seat pocket. "Are you going to tell me your actual job, or should I keep assuming?" The question landed flat and direct, without the performance of casual curiosity. She was asking because she had already decided he wasn't what he appeared to be, and she wanted to give him the opportunity to tell the truth before she filled in her own answer. He respected that more than he expected to. "Finance," he said, which was true. Baekryong Holdings was a legitimate financial entity. Most of what he touched daily was entirely legal. The rest was the foundation underneath, the thing nobody saw when they looked at the building above it. "Finance," she repeated with the flat echo of someone deciding how much they believe a word. "Holdings," he added, "acquisitions, asset management. In Seoul, and elsewhere." She looked at him for another moment. Then she said, "You have the kind of stillness that people learn, not the kind they're born with." His jaw tightened one small, involuntary movement he controlled immediately. "Is that relevant?" "Probably not." She turned to look at the seat back ahead of her. "I notice things about people. Occupational habit. When you spend your days explaining bioluminescence to 16-year-olds who would rather be anywhere else, you get good at reading the room very fast. And what does the room tell you?" She was quiet for a moment. "Then, that you're used to being the most dangerous person anywhere you are. And that, right now, you're deciding whether that's still true." The cabin hummed. 3 rows ahead, a child was asking her father something in a low, insistent voice. A sound like "green," the kind of question that had been building for 20 minutes before the child finally couldn't contain it anymore. The father answered quietly. The child looked satisfied. "It's like greenwood splitting. These small human transactions Seong-hyun had spent 20 years moving through rooms where they didn't happen, where every exchange was weighted and nothing was innocent. "You're a marine biology teacher," he said. "I am." "From where?" "Atlanta. Originally. I've been in D.C. for 9 years. She glanced sideways at him. "Teaching at a public high school, which my family considers a generous way of saying I threw away my potential." What was your potential supposed to be? She laughed, once short, without humor. Law, investment banking. Something that could be said at a dinner party without requiring explanation. My father spent 30 years building a consulting firm. My mother, you met my mother's aspirations when Damian Whitmore appeared at our gate. She arranged that. She's been arranging things since I was 17. She said it without bitterness, which was harder than bitterness. It was the voice of someone who had processed a fact so many times it had lost its edge without losing its weight. She loves me. That's the part that makes it complicated. She's not doing any of this because she doesn't care. She does it because she's convinced that what she wants for me is the same as what's good for me. And Damian Whitmore is what's good for you. Damian Whitmore is successful, well-connected, and genuinely wants me. She shifted in her seat. On paper, he's everything. In reality, he's the kind of man who touches your arm without asking and calls it affection. Seong-hyun was quiet. He thought about the arm, the grip at the gate that he'd already reconstructed from the small tension he'd observed in her posture when Damian had come down the aisle. He thought about the look Damian had given her when he'd said, "We'll talk later, not a promise." Schedule. How long has your mother been trying to arrange this? He asked. 2 years of Damian specifically. My whole life in general. She pulled her water bottle from the seat pocket and drank without tasting it. She came from a family that lost everything when she was 12. Her entire adulthood has been about making sure that never happens to me. Security, stability, a man with resources, a pause. She built a whole architecture of love around fear, and she can't see it from inside. The flight tracker showed them somewhere above the Ural Mountains. The tiny plane crept forward without urgency. "Why are you going to the wedding?" Amara said. It wasn't a change of subject, she had simply completed her own thought and moved to his. "You said your brother called you directly." "He did." And he was quiet for a moment. The security brief sat unopened in his hand. He closed the app. He said he needed me there, not my position. Me. He paused. "I'm not certain there's a significant difference between those two things anymore." The honesty of it surprised him as he said it. He hadn't planned to say that. He had planned to give her the appropriate half answer, the kind that sounded open, while revealing nothing, but instead the actual thing had come out, and now it was in the air between them with nowhere to go. Amara didn't react with the soft sympathy he'd expected, the reflexive that must be so hard that people used like a social bandage. She just said, "How long since you've seen him?" 14 months. Your choice or his mine. He said it without inflection. There was a situation. I kept him at a distance. It was safer. For him or for you? He looked at her. She looked back unblinking. "Both," he said finally. She nodded once, not like she was absolving him, just like she was receiving information and storing it accurately. He found that he preferred it. He had spent years surrounded by people who agreed with everything he said, and the agreement had the texture of fog present everywhere, substantial nowhere. "I have a student," Amara said, 12 years old. "His name is Marcus. He barely speaks in class. First month of school, he sat in the back and put his head down every single day, and I called on him 0 times because he made it clear that being called on felt like an attack." She looked at the seat back ahead. "In October, we had a lab with real starfish borrowed from the aquarium program. I watched Marcus pick one up and I watched his face do something it never did in the classroom." She paused. He held it for a full 2 minutes. Then he looked up and said very quietly, "It's holding on." Seong-hyun waited. "He wasn't talking about the starfish," she said. He was quiet for a long moment. Then what happened to him? His parents separated over the summer. He was staying with a grandmother he barely knew. Nobody had told him explicitly what was happening, just that things had changed, which is what adults say when they mean everything you counted on is gone. She picked up the water bottle again. Didn't drink, just held it. "I started staying after class with him twice a week. Not to fix anything, just to show him someone would be in the room." Seong-hyun looked at his hands. The platinum ring on his left hand caught the cabin light. "That's why you teach," he said. "Not a question. That's why I teach." The serving cart rattled down the aisle, the flight attendant navigating the narrow space with the practical tolerance of someone who had done this several thousand times. She paused at row 24 and offered the standard options with the standard smile. And for a moment, the normal machinery of the flight reasserted itself, interrupting the specific gravity that had been building between two strangers who had, without planning to, told each other true things. Amara took orange juice. Seong-hyun took water and then felt slightly absurd for noticing that she'd chosen something stronger despite what she was clearly dealing with. Cart moved on, and then, from 4 rows ahead, Claudette Bennett stood up. She didn't look back immediately. She gathered herself with the deliberate composure of a woman who had decided on a course of action and intended to execute it correctly. She straightened her blazer. She picked up her small purse. And then she turned and walked back down the aisle toward row 24 with the measured pace of someone who was in no hurry because she had already decided how this conversation would go. Amara went completely rigid. Not obviously, she didn't grip the armrest or make a sound. But Seong-hyun felt it in the 4 inches of space between them. A sudden stillness, the kind that comes before something either breaks or holds. "She's coming," Amara said quietly. "Flat, you don't have to." "I'm your husband," he said. "I know." Claudette Bennett arrived at row 24. She was a small woman who took up more space than her size, accounted for the posture. The precision of her appearance, the way her eyes moved across a situation and gathered information before her expression committed to anything. She looked at Seong-hyun first, which told him she had already assessed Amara and decided the stranger required evaluation before the conversation could proceed. "You must be the husband," Claudette said. Her voice was warm in the way that certain formal rooms were warm heated by design, not accident. He recognized it. The voice of someone who could be genuinely kind and was also, always, performing a calibration. "Kang Seong-hyun," he said. He didn't stand. The aisle didn't allow it, but he met her eyes directly with the particular quality of attention that he knew communicated respect without deference. Seong-hyun is fine. Claudette considered this. Then she sat down in the empty aisle seat across from them, the seat that had been empty since boarding, occupied now by a woman who had decided she had a right to it. Which she did. She was the mother. "Amara," she said, turning to her daughter. "Mom," the word was careful. Contained. 8 months, Claudette said. "We wanted to wait before—" "I'm not angry." Claudette's voice was level. "I'm trying to understand why my daughter would get married and tell me nothing for 8 months. The silence that followed had edges. Amara looked at her mother with the complex expression of a person who loves someone and is also furious at them, and is also, in this particular moment, lying to them all 3 things simultaneously, and none of them simple. "It was complicated," Amara said. "His situation." "His situation." Claudette looked at Song-hyun, not hostile. Assessing. "And what is your situation, Song-hyun?" He held her gaze without any particular effort. "My family is complicated," he said. "The kind of complicated that makes announcements difficult. I wanted to protect Amara from the attention. Protect her." Claudette let the word sit for a moment, examining it. "From your family. From my world," he said. "They are not always gentle with new additions." It was a careful truth. His world was not gentle with anything, and anyone connected to him carried risk whether they knew it or not. So he was not technically lying. Claudette looked at her daughter. "You seem—" She stopped. Looked again. "Different." "I'm fine, Mom. I didn't say you weren't fine." Claudette's voice softened by approximately 1 degree, which was significant from her. "I said different. You seem lighter. The last time I saw you at your cousin's birthday, you barely—" She stopped herself again. Tried another entry point. "Are you happy?" The word fell into the conversation like a stone into still water. Amara opened her mouth, closed it, and in that pause, that fraction of a second before the performed answer could assemble itself, something true crossed her face. Not the careful happiness she arranged for family occasions. Something messier and more real, the expression of someone who has been asked a question they didn't expect to be asked and doesn't have a prepared answer for it. "Yes," she said. Claudette looked at Seong-hyun. He didn't say anything. He held Claudette's gaze, and in it he could read, with the precision of a man who had spent decades reading rooms a mother, in the middle of a genuine revision. She had come back here with an architecture of suspicion, the unannounced marriage, the unexpected man, the daughter who had been increasingly distant for 3 years. She had intended to question and evaluate and reserve judgment. But she had looked at her daughter's face, and now she was recalculating. I should have told you, Amara said carefully. I know that. You should have, Claudette agreed. She stood from the aisle seat, smoothed her blazer, looked at Seong-hyun one more time with the unhurried thoroughness of someone completing an assessment. You'll be at the wedding in Amsterdam. Dae-jung's wedding. Yes, Seong-hyun said. Good. She said it like a decision rather than a pleasantry. Then, to Amara, we'll talk more when we land. She touched her daughter's hand, one brief, genuine contact, and then walked back up the aisle with the same measured pace she'd arrived with. Amara let out a breath that had clearly been trapped since her mother's footsteps had first appeared. She believed you, she said. The surprise in her voice was genuine. She believed the ring, he said. The rest she believed because she wanted to. Amara turned to look at him. What does that mean? It means your mother came back here looking for a reason to feel better about you. He kept his voice even, factual. She found one. People find what they need to find when the alternative is something they can't absorb. She was quiet for a moment. Then that's either very insightful or very cynical. Usually both things are the same thing. She looked at him for a long moment. San. Then she turned away and he thought the conversation was closing, that she was retreating back into the careful distance they'd maintained between revelations. The rhythm of two people who kept advancing and then pulling back to check whether they'd gone too far. But instead she said, "Tell me something about your brother." It was not a question he was prepared for. Why? Because you've been on this flight for 3 hours and you haven't thought about him once, and he's the reason you're here. She paused. That seems like something worth noticing. The accuracy of it hit him somewhere behind the sternum, that blunt, quiet accuracy that had nothing to do with intimacy and everything to do with observation. She was right. He had been briefed. He had recalibrated. He had managed Damien Whitmore and Claudette Bennett and the strange negotiation of his own honesty, and he had not thought once about Dae-jung, who was somewhere in Amsterdam right now, probably trying to pretend he wasn't nervous about his own wedding. He's 34, Seong-hyun said. Amara waited. He wanted to be an architect. He studied in Paris for 2 years. He was good, genuinely good, the kind of talent that doesn't come from discipline, but from something structural in the way a person sees. He paused. He came back because our mother was sick. He came back and he stayed, and the architecture practice became something smaller, and eventually he stopped talking about Paris. Did she know? Your mother. That he gave it up, she knew. He was quiet. Him to go back several times. He wouldn't. Why? Because some people decide that the people they love are worth more than the thing they wanted. He said it without sentiment. Just the weight of a fact. He never said it that directly. But I watched him make the decision. He didn't make it once. He made it every morning for 4 years. Amara had gone still in the way she went still when something landed on her. Not the rigid stillness of before this was different. Quieter. And you, she said. What did you decide every morning? His jaw tightened. I decided to make sure he never had to worry about money. Ever. That no decision he made would ever be constrained by. That's not the same thing. The words were gentle. Completely ungently true. He looked at her. No, he said. It's not. The cabin hummed. The flight tracker showed 400 miles to go before they reached the edge of the continent. The child 3 rows ahead had fallen asleep against her father's arm, her mouth slightly open, the total unconsciousness of someone who has no reason to be watchful. Seong-hyun looked at the flight tracker for a long time. Then he heard a shift in the quality of the cabin noise. Not the normal adjustments of a long-haul flight. Something more deliberate. He looked up. Damien Whitmore was coming through the curtain from first class again. This time he wasn't alone. He had a flight attendant with him, not being escorted by her, but speaking to her quietly as he came, with the comfortable authority of someone who had decided that a small amount of charm and the implication of important business would smooth whatever he was about to do. The attendant peeled off toward the galley. Damien continued down the aisle. He stopped at row 24. His jacket was off now. The confidence was still present, but it had changed its shape, less the broad stance of earlier and something tighter, more focused. He had spent time in first class recalculating, and now he had returned with a specific purpose. "I'd like to speak with Amara," he said to Seong-hyun. "Privately." "She's here," Song-hyun said. "I'm aware." Damien's voice carried a careful surface-level courtesy that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm asking you, as her husband, for a moment of your wife's time." The structure of it was deliberate, using the word husband to acknowledge the claim while simultaneously using the politeness as a blade, because a husband who refused this request would look insecure. And Damien Whitmore had clearly spent the last 2 hours designing something that put Song-hyun in a position that required either compliance or exposure. Amara started to speak. "No," Song-hyun said. One word. No explanation appended to it. Damien's face went very still. "Excuse me. She doesn't want a private conversation. If you have something to say, say it here." Song-hyun Amara started. "Here," he said again to Damien. Not loud, not threatening. Just the word, sitting in the air with the full weight of a man who understood that certainty was more powerful than volume. Damien looked at Amara. She looked back at him, and in her face he apparently read something he'd hoped not to find, because something in his expression resolved into a harder shape. "I spoke to your mother," Damien said. To Amara now, no longer bothering with the performance of addressing Song-hyun. "She's surprised, so am I, I'm sure," Amara said. "This isn't," he stopped, started again. "Your family has invested a great deal of time and consideration into me," Amara said quietly. "Not with me." The distinction landed in the air between them. Damien absorbed it. "I'm trying to understand what happened here." "Nothing happened," Amara said. "I made a decision." "A decision." His voice tightened by 1 degree. "You made a decision without consulting." "Without consulting who, Damien?" Her voice was flat now, stripped of the careful tone. "You're not my family. You're a man my family decided they wanted for me without asking me what I wanted." The cabin around them had achieved the particular quality of silence in which everyone within earshot is listening while pretending not to. Seong-hyun was aware of this the way he was aware of exits. "After everything your mother and I have," Damien started. "My mother," Amara said. "You just said your mother and I." "That's the entire conversation we needed to have." Damien's eyes moved to Song-hyun with a new quality in them, not the recalculation of before, but something thinner. "You don't know this man." "I know him better than you know me," she said. And that took 8 months and about 4 conversations. Damien looked at her for a long moment. He was a man who was not accustomed to losing the shape of a conversation, and he was losing it now, and the visible effort of trying to recover it was doing something unflattering to his face. "This is a mistake," he said, quietly but clearly. "Damien." Her voice dropped further, not gentler, just lower. "Please go back to first class." He held the space for 3 seconds. Then he looked at Seong-hyun one final time along, considering look that had nothing friendly in it, and then he turned and walked back up the aisle. The silence he left behind had a different texture than the one before. Amara faced forward. She was doing the breathing thing controlled, deliberate, the technique of someone who has practiced not showing how shaken they are. Song-hyun waited. "Thank you," she said eventually. "He'll be back," Song-hyun said. "He's not done." "I know." She was quiet for a moment. "He never accepts a closed door. He always finds a window. Then we need to anticipate the window." She turned to look at him. In her eyes was the complicated expression of someone who was trying to understand exactly what kind of person they were sitting next to, what category he occupied, what his actual investment in this was, whether the competence he kept displaying was a habit or a decision. "Why does it matter to you?" she said. Not an accusation. A genuine question asked with the directness that was apparently just her nature, the quality that made her good with teenagers and clearly exhausting for her family. He thought about that. The honest answer was that he wasn't entirely sure. Some part of it was functional. He had agreed to the arrangement, and Seong-hyun did not do things halfway. Some part of it was simpler and more uncomfortable. He recognized something in the particular kind of tired she was carrying, the exhaustion of being managed by people who loved you, and recognition made a person want to do something, even when doing something wasn't strategically warranted. He did not say any of this. What he said was, "Your mother came back here and she looked at you." And for approximately 3 seconds, before she controlled her expression, she looked relieved. He paused. "The last time someone looked relieved to see me was..." He stopped. "I'm not certain anyone ever has." The words dropped into the space between them. Amara looked at him, with an expression he didn't quite have a name for. Then, very slowly, she turned back to the window. "Tell me something else," she said quietly. "About your brother. What's her name? The woman he's marrying." "Jiyeon. Is she good for him?" He thought about Jiyeon, her laugh. The way she looked at Daejung when she thought no one was watching, the patience she'd shown during the years when Seong-hyun's world had made his brother's life complicated by proximity. "Yes," he said. "She is. Have you ever told him that?" The question opened a silence that lasted a very long time. From the galley ahead, a flight attendant emerged with a fresh cart, beginning the slow navigation of the aisle. The cabin lights had been dimmed to half. Most of the passengers around them had pulled blankets up or pressed headphones over their ears, settling into the long middle hours of the flight where nothing is required except endurance. Song-hyun looked at his phone. He opened the messages thread with Daejung, the last message. 14 months ago. From himself, "Stay out of it. I'll handle it. Don't call me for a while." His brother had not called. Sent one text 6 weeks later, young. Jiyeon said yes. Song-hyun had read it, had not responded. Now he sat at 35,000 feet with that unresponded message, somewhere below him in the digital record of a relationship he had put on hold like a problem he would get to when the other problems were resolved. And the other problems were never fully resolved, and now he was going to a wedding. He put the phone away. "No," he said, "I haven't told him." Amara said nothing. The cart rattled past. And then, from the front of the cabin, came the sound of Claudette Bennett's voice, not loud, not dramatic, but carrying with the particular clarity of a woman who had decided something and was acting on it. And when Song-hyun looked up, he saw her standing in the aisle ahead, not walking toward them this time, but turned toward Damian Whitmore, who had apparently come back through the curtain a second time. The conversation between them was inaudible from row 24, but the body language was not. Claudette was not performing warmth. She was speaking in the compact, efficient register of a woman delivering a message she expected to be received clearly. Damian had his hands open at his sides, a posture of reason, of surely we can work this out, but Claudette was not looking for a negotiation. She was ending one. Amara had gone completely still beside Seong-hyun. She was watching her mother with an expression that moved through surprise and confusion and landed somewhere. He couldn't read the face of a daughter, watching a parent do something entirely unexpected. Damian said something. Claudette looked at him for 3 seconds without responding. Then she said something back, quietly, and turned and walked back to her seat. Damian stood in the aisle for a moment. Then he turned and walked back through the curtain to first class. He did not look at row 24 as he passed. What did she say to him? Amara breathed. "I don't know," Song-hyun said, "but he's not coming back." "How do you know?" "Because I know what a final conversation looks like." Amara was quiet. When he glanced at her, she was still watching the curtain where her mother had turned back, the place where something had just shifted in the architecture of the flight in a way that hadn't been planned. "She surprised you," he said. Amara stopped. Tried again. "She's been on Damian's side for 2 years. She's been building this. She wouldn't just..." She shook her head. "I don't understand." Song-hyun thought about Claudette's face when she had looked at her daughter. The 3 seconds of relief before the composure came back. "People change their minds when they see something they weren't accounting for," he said. "What did she see?" He paused. "You," he said, happy. "Even if she doesn't know it's complicated. She saw the thing she actually wanted, and it wasn't Damian Whitmore." Amara absorbed this. The cabs around them had settled into the deep quiet of a long-haul night crossing blankets, headphones, the soft machinery of hundreds of people choosing unconsciousness over endurance. The overhead lights were down to their minimum. The flight tracker showed them suspended somewhere above the dark water, the animated plain motionless in the way that things far away always appear. Motionless even when they're moving faster than the mind can make comfortable. "I'm going to sleep," Amara said finally. The exhaustion in her voice was genuine and total, not the tiredness of a difficult day, but the specific depletion of someone who has been running on adrenaline for hours and has now, suddenly, run out of reason to keep running. "Go ahead," he said. "Wake me if anything. Nothing is going to happen." She looked at him sidelong. "You don't know that." "No," he agreed, "but I'll be awake." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she turned toward the window, adjusted the thin airline blanket across her lap, and closed her eyes. He watched the flight tracker. He did not sleep. And 40 minutes later, when she shifted in unconscious exhaustion and her head came to rest against his shoulder, he sat completely motionless because he was very good at being still, and because he was thinking about a message from 14 months ago that he had never answered, and because somewhere above the dark Atlantic, a San who had built his entire life on knowing exactly what was coming in every room it entered had run out of certainty and couldn't decide whether that was something to fix or something to let happen. Plane flew on. In first class, Damian Whitmore had his laptop open. The document on the screen was a property transfer contract, one of 4, that bore Amara's family name across various business interests that her mother did not know Damian had quietly been accumulating over the past 18 months. Kind of leverage that didn't look like leverage until it was too late to reframe it. He closed the laptop. He ordered a drink, and he began very quietly to make a different plan. He had been awake for 39 hours when she stirred. Amara came back from sleep the way people do when something pulls them up before they're ready, not gradually, not peacefully, but with a small, sharp intake of breath and the sudden tension of a body that has remembered, mid-rest, that the situation it left was not resolved. Her head lifted from his shoulder. She straightened. She spent 2 seconds orienting herself to the cabin, the dimmed lights, the low mechanical hum, and then she looked at the window and the darkness outside it. Then she looked at him. He was in the same position she had left him. Phone down, hands in his lap, eyes on the flight tracker, which showed them somewhere over the western edge of continental Europe. The animated plane now close enough to its destination that the remaining distance had become something countable. "You didn't sleep," she said. Her voice was rough with it, the observation coming out without polish, the way things came out in the first 30 seconds after waking. "No." "How long was I? 2 hours and 40 minutes. She absorbed this, looked at the shoulder she had apparently been using as a pillow, and opened her mouth, and he said, before she could, "Don't." She closed her mouth. A beat. "Then I was going to say thank you." "Don't." She looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone deciding whether to push, and then she turned away and he heard her exhale, long, deliberate, the recalibration of a person assembling themselves after unexpected rest. Outside the window, the first pale suggestion of morning was beginning at the absolute edge of the horizon. Not light yet. The precursor to light, a thinning of the dark, a shift in register from black to something marginally less absolute. It would be another 40 minutes before it became anything anyone would call dawn. The cabin around them was still mostly asleep. Seong-hyun spent the 2 hours and 40 minutes doing what he always did when he couldn't sleep and couldn't act. He had thought in straight lines. He had organized the available information about Damian Whitmore with the same methodology he used when assessing any situation that contained a threat. He had gone through what he knew, what he had observed, what he had inferred, and he had arrived at a picture of the man that was cleaner and more concerning than the initial sketch. A sound. The property transfer contracts on Damian's laptop screen. He had caught a partial reflection in the darkened window as Damian had walked back through the cabin, and the words hadn't fully registered in the moment. But they had resolved themselves during the quiet hours, the way things always did when he gave them enough stillness. Contracts, a family name, multiple documents. He had not said any of this to Amara. Not yet. She picked up her water bottle, found it empty, and set it back. She pulled her hair back with practiced efficiency, using the elastic from her wrist, and then she turned to face the cabin and did the quiet assessment of someone who has learned to read a room's temperature from whatever signals it provides at low volume. She looked forward, She looked at her mother's headrest, visible 4 rows ahead. The slight shape of Claudette's head tilted against the window in what might have been sleep. "She's still out," Amara said quietly. "She hasn't moved in 90 minutes. Amara looked at him. "You've been watching my mother sleep for 90 minutes. "I've been watching the cabin." He paused. "Your mother is part of the cabin." She made a sound that was almost a laugh. Small, tired. Real. She settled back into her seat, and for a moment they sat in the particular quiet of 2 people who have passed some threshold in a short amount of time and are now on the other side of it, in the unfamiliar territory where neither performance nor distance feels quite right. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You've been asking me things for 4 hours. Something different." She picked up the empty water bottle. Put it down. Until her hands needed something. When her mind was organizing a question, she wasn't sure she should ask. "What actually happened with your brother?" 14 months ago. The flight tracker showed 212 miles to Amsterdam. Seong-hyun looked at it for a long moment. He had not been asked this question, not by anyone, not in any form since the event itself. A sound like green wood splitting. Because the people in his world who knew anything about it understood immediately that asking was not something they were permitted to do, and the people outside his world knew nothing. He was, therefore, entirely unprepared for the particular sensation of someone asking it with nothing behind the question except wanting to know. "There was a rival organization," he said, "moving into distribution territory we controlled in Incheon. It became hostile." He paused, selecting what he could say from what was actually true. "My brother had a business consultation contract with one of their front companies. He didn't know it was connected. I knew, and I didn't tell him, because pulling him out suddenly would have signaled to our intelligence at the other side." Another pause. "He found out through other channels. He called me. I told him to stay away, to stop calling, that I would handle everything and contact him when it was resolved." "And was it resolved?" "Yes." "And then you didn't contact him?" The sentence sat there, unembellished and exact. "No," he said. "I didn't." Amara was quiet for a moment. "Why?" He looked at his hands. The ring caught a sliver of cabin light. "Because by the time it was resolved, 14 months had passed, and I had decided that the distance was probably safer for him. That having me present in his life was a liability." "Did he agree with that?" "I didn't ask him." She turned and looked at him directly. Not with accusation, she seemed constitutionally uninterested in accusation, but with the kind of clear level attention that was harder to sit under than anger. "So you made a unilateral decision about what was best for someone you love, without asking them, based on what you thought was safer." He heard what she wasn't saying. "Yes," he said. "Your mother did the same thing with me," she said. Not as an attack. Just the parallel placed quietly on the table between them. He sat with that for a moment. "Yes," he said again. She did. The edge of morning at the horizon had developed slightly a thin gray-blue line now, the kind of color that existed only in the 20 minutes before genuine dawn broke. Color that had no name, because nobody needed to name something that lasted 20 minutes. He watched it. Then his phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. It was his head of operations. The message was 4 words. "Call me." Urgent now. In 20 years, his head of operations had sent that message twice. Once when a federal investigation had made unexpected contact with a Becrion subsidiary. Once when a senior lieutenant had been found to be cooperating with an intelligence unit. Seong-hyun looked at the message, looked at the flight tracker, looked at the altitude indicator, which showed 34,000 feet too high for a reliable call, and the in-flight Wi-Fi was the satellite variety that dropped and fragmented, and could not be trusted with anything sensitive. He typed back, "Flight lands in 80 minutes. Hold." The response came in 11 seconds. "It can't hold. It's about Amsterdam." The cold came first, not emotion, just the physical response, the body's system reading threat before the mind finished processing. He felt it in his hands and in the space behind his sternum, the particular chill of something moving in a direction he hadn't anticipated. He typed, "What about Amsterdam?" The response took longer. He watched the cursor. Around him the sleeping cabin breathed its low, mechanical breath. The message came through as in fragments, the satellite connection, breaking it into pieces that arrived slightly out of sequence, which he had to reorder mentally as he read. Dae-jung's partner Ji Yeon, her family has connections to the CO network. Not peripheral. Her uncle is Seo Gwangmin. We missed it because she uses her mother's surname. Seo Gwangmin has been positioning for 6 months. The wedding is the introduction. You walk in tomorrow. You're walking into a room where Gwangmin has already told his people you're open for a deal. If you refuse in that room, in front of his family, Amsterdam is a different jurisdiction, and Gwangmin has 3 people on retainer there who are not subtle. Seong-hyun read it twice. Then he looked at the window. The gray-blue edge of morning. At the distance remaining on the flight tracker. Seo Gwangmin, he knew the name. Knew the organization, a mid-tier network, based in Busan, that had been expanding aggressively into Seoul's secondary markets for 2 years. The kind of organization that couldn't challenge Baekhyun Holdings directly but had been looking, with the patient hunger of something that understood it needed to be strategic, for a different kind of leverage. A wedding. His brother's wedding. He thought about Dae-jung's voice on the phone. I need you there. Not the chairman. You. He thought about the 14 months of distance. He thought about what it meant that the call had come when it had specific, personal, effective. He typed, "Does Dae-jung know?" The response was immediate, unknown. Could be entirely innocent. Could be, she told him. Could be Gwangmin arranged the relationship from the start. We don't have clarity. The cold behind his surface spread. He put the phone face down on his knee. Next to him, Amara had been watching the flight tracker with the visible patience of someone who understood that something had shifted and was giving him the space to process it. She had not asked. She had not pushed. She was doing the thing she apparently did, waiting, reading, not requiring anything. Something's wrong, she said. Not a question. He looked at her. Your face, she said. You went somewhere. He considered what to tell her. The old calculus ran automatically. What's necessary? What's safe to share? What creates liability? He had run this calculation across thousands of conversations, and the result was always a measured version of the truth enough to be functional, nothing that couldn't be walked back. He said, the wedding may be more complicated than I knew. She waited. Someone connected to an organization I have a conflict with may have arranged to be present. Through an indirect connection, he paused. I need to assess the situation before I walk into that room. She was quiet for a moment. Then, is your brother in danger? Question hit the part of him the calculation didn't reach. I don't know, he said. And saying I don't know without the immediate move to I'll handle it, felt like pressing a bruise. I don't know if he's aware of the connection. I don't know if he'd tell me if he were. Because of the 14 months. Because of the 14 months. She looked at the seat back ahead. He watched her think, not the performance of thinking, but the real version, the small, barely visible movement of someone running through information and arriving at something. You need to call him, she said. I can't call him from this altitude reliably. I know, I mean when we land. She turned to him. Before anything else. Before you assess or strategize or figure out your approach. You call him and you ask him directly, and if he's involved. Then you need to know that from him, not from someone else. She held his gaze. And if he's not involved, then he's about to get married not knowing that his wedding has been turned into someone else's agenda. And he deserves to know that from you. Seong-hyun said nothing. The edge of morning had become actual morning, a low orange smear across the horizon. The first real color of the day arriving without fanfare. Cabin lights adjusted automatically, the overhead panels brightening by gradual increments as the flight systems registered the change in external light. Around them, people began to wake. Specific sounds of a long-haul cabin coming back to life. Coughs, the rustle of blankets, the creak of someone changing position after hours in the same configuration. A flight attendant appeared from the galley and began navigating the aisle with the professional pleasantness of someone performing a role they had performed many times. Then Claudette Bennett stood up. She stretched briefly, one small private moment of physicality, The acknowledgement of a body that had been folded in an airline seat for hours, and then she gathered herself with the efficiency of someone who had already been awake long enough to have done their thinking. She turned toward the back of the cabin. She was not coming to check on Amara. She was coming with something specific in her hands. Seong-hyun saw it from 3 rows away, a small cream-colored envelope, held with both hands at her midsection. The grip of someone carrying something they've been carrying for a while and have finally decided to put down. She arrived at row 24. Amara looked up at her mother and went still. Claudette looked at her daughter for a long moment. She didn't look at Seong-hyun, which he understood as deliberate, not rudeness, but the acknowledgement that what she was about to do was between the two of them, and he was present, but not the point. "I wrote this 3 weeks ago," Claudette said. She held out the envelope. "I've been waiting for the right time, and I've decided there isn't one. There's just now." Amara took the envelope slowly. She looked at it. Her name was written on the front in her mother's handwriting, careful, slightly formal, the handwriting of a woman who had written checks and thank you notes and university recommendations in the same hand for decades. "What is this?" Amara said. "Read it when I'm not watching," Claudette said. Her voice had a quality Seong-hyun hadn't heard from her before, stripped of the management, the calibration. Just the voice. "But I want you to know," she stopped. "Try it again. I watched you sleep on this flight. When I was walking back from the restroom, maybe an hour ago." She looked at Amara with a directness that cost her something visible. "You looked like you did when you were 9 years old, and you'd found something that mattered to you, and you'd taken it to bed with you. You had that face." Amara said nothing. "I haven't seen that face in a very long time," Claudette said. Then, quieter, "I'm sorry it took me this long to realize what I was doing to it." She turned and walked back to her seat. Amara sat with the envelope in both hands. Seong-hyun watched her not open it and not open it, suspended in the moment before, and he looked away because some things weren't his to witness. He looked at his phone. His head of operations had sent a follow-up. One more thing. The property holdings registered to a Bennett family trust 3 commercial properties in Georgia. Whitmore Capital has held a quiet lien on them for 14 months. Attached to a business loan the Bennett patriarch took in 2022. If called, it liquidates the trust. Whitmore has been sitting on the call option for over a year. Seong-hyun read it twice. Then he looked at Amara. She was still holding the envelope, unopened. He thought about Damien's hands on her arm at the gate, about the particular confidence of a man who never actually doubted the outcome, about the laptop screen and the property transfer contracts, and the quiet patience of someone who had been waiting with leverage he never intended to use, only needed to have. The lien on the family trust, the arranged presence on this specific flight, the 2 years of patient pursuit. Damien Whitmore had not been hoping to win Amara's affection. He had been building a structure around her family's financial exposure with the long-term patience of a man who understood that the most effective cage was one the occupant didn't recognize as a cage. Seong-hyun's jaw tightened once, hard, then released. "Amara," he said. She turned to him, the envelope still unopened in her hands. Splits. He thought about the choice in front of him, say it now, before she read whatever her mother had written, while she was still suspended in the complicated grace of that moment. Or wait. Let her have the letter. Tell her later. He had spent 20 years making strategic decisions about what other people could handle and when. He looked at her hands on the envelope. "Damien Whitmore holds a financial lien against your family's property trust," he said. "He's had it for 14 months. He can call it any time." Color left her face. Not gradually, it was immediate, the blood pulling back the way it did when the body received information that required emergency redistribution. She stared at him. The envelope shifted in her hands, going slightly crooked, like her grip had loosened without her noticing. "What?" she said. The word came out without inflection. Pure shock. "A quiet lien. Connected to a business loan your father took in 2022. Whitmore Capital has been holding the call option. It would liquidate the trust if exercised." That she stopped. "How do you know this?" "My operations team flagged it. They run background on anything adjacent to a situation I'm involved in." He paused. "I should have told you sooner." She looked at him. The expression moving through her face was complicated and rapid. The sequence of someone processing not just information, but the reframing of an entire architecture they've been living inside without knowing what it was made of. She stopped again. Started from a different direction. 2 years. He spent 2 years pursuing me, and the whole time he already had. Contingency. Yes. He wasn't doing this because he wanted me. Her voice was low and flat, the voice of something being stripped down to its frame. He was doing it because my family owed him. And if I married him, the debt disappeared. And if he didn't, he had options. She sat with this. He watched her sit with it. There was a particular quality to the silence of someone whose understanding of a large portion of their recent life has just been surgically revised. It was not the silence of shock. Shock was loud in its way, reactive, full of the noise of the system trying to compensate. This was something that came after shock, quieter and heavier. Splitting. The silence of a person standing in a room they thought they knew, touching the walls and finding them made of something different than they'd always believed. My mother doesn't know, Amara said. Almost certainly not. She's been pushing me toward him for 2 years, and she doesn't know that he had leverage over her the entire time. She looked at the envelope in her hands. Then at the headrest 4 rows ahead. Her mother, who had just handed her an apology she'd been carrying for weeks, who had just told Damien Whitmore in a quiet, private conversation somewhere in the aisle that whatever she'd been arranging was over her mother, who had done all of this without knowing she'd been a piece in someone else's construction. I have to tell her, Amara said. Yes, she stopped. She's going to be devastated. She'll feel like she did all of this to me, and she was being used at the same time, and she won't know whether to be furious or... Amara, he said her name quietly, not to stop her, just to put a point in the chain so she could find it. Yes, she will feel all of those things, and you're going to need to let her. She looked at him. You can't manage this for her, he said, any more than she should have been managing things for you. The truth of it sat between them. She looked at the envelope. Then finally, she opened it. He looked away at the window, at the now fully broken morning outside, the low orange sky of dawn over what must have been the Dutch coast, flat and pale and expansive. The land appearing below, through the cloud breaks in geometric sections of gray-green field. He heard her breathing change as she read. He did not look at her. When she finished, she folded the letter back into the envelope and held it flat against her knee with both palms. The way she'd held the book earlier, the specific gesture of someone returning something to the place where it was safe. She knew, Amara said quietly, about herself, what she was doing. She wrote it all down. A pause. She said she didn't know how to stop, so she'd been trying to find the right time to say she was sorry, and the right time kept not arriving. And then she got on this plane, and she saw my face, and she decided the right time was never coming. So her voice caught once, briefly. She controlled it. She'd just hand it over and let me do what I wanted with it. Seong-hyun said nothing. That's not how she talks, Amara said. She doesn't hand things over. She manages them. A longer pause. It must have taken her so long to write this. He thought about Claudette sitting in whatever rooms she'd sat in, writing, something that went against every instinct she had, because she'd decided the instinct was wrong. He thought about what that cost. He knew something about decisions that went against every trained instinct he had been making them, in small increments for the last several hours. The seatbelt sign chimed on. The captain's voice came over the intercom with the standard landing announcement, the weather in Amsterdam, the local time, the descent beginning shortly. Around them, the cabin began the specific organized chaos of landing preparation. Seats upright, tray tables up, the flight attendants moving through with the brisk efficiency of the final act. The descent began. Amara looked at the window. He watched her watching the land below the flat Dutch landscape emerging from the morning cloud, the water of the IJsselmeer catching the low light, the geometric order of a country that had spent centuries organizing its elements against the constant pressure of the sea. What are you going to do? She said. About your brother. I'm going to call him when we land. And about the other thing. The organization. He was quiet for a moment. I'm going to find out what my brother knows before I do anything. She nodded slowly then. And if he's not involved? If he married someone without knowing who her family was? Then I need to protect him without letting him know he needs protecting. Can you do that? He thought about the last time he'd tried to protect Dae-jung by keeping him in the dark. About the 14 months that had followed. I don't know, he said. The plane broke through the low cloud layer, and suddenly the ground was close and real, the runway lights appearing in the morning gray. The land rushing up with the specific urgency of things that had always been there and were only now becoming relevant. Amara turned from the window. When we land, she said, I need to tell my mother about the lean, about what Damien has been doing. I know. She's going to want to confront him. He'll be on the same flight through customs. You have maybe 40 minutes from gate to exit. She absorbed this. I need to do it before he disappears into Mara. He looked at her directly. What do you want from me right now? Logistics or... Both, she said. Logistics and... She stopped. I don't know. Just don't disappear. He looked at her. She looked back. She hadn't meant it the way it sounded. He could see the slight widening of her eyes that followed the words, the recognition that she'd said something more honest than she'd intended. She started to qualify it, and he said, I won't. She held his gaze. The wheels touched down. The cabin erupted in the small, contained sounds of landing the engine reverse thrust, the deceleration, the overhead bins that never quite stopped rattling, no matter how many times a person flew, and around them the organized performance of arriving resumed, everyone becoming again the version of themselves that had a destination. Seong-hyun sat with both feet on the floor and felt the aircraft slowing beneath him. He thought about Dae-jung. He thought about Ji-yeon, whose surname he had not questioned because he'd had no reason to question it, and about Seo Gwang-min, who had possibly spent the better part of a year engineering an introduction that would either fold Baekwildeen Buhon Holdings into a compromise or expose its chairman to physical risk in a jurisdiction where his network was thin. He thought about the way Amara had said, don't disappear. He thought about what it meant that the most genuinely afraid he had felt in the last 24 hours was not when he'd read the message about Gwang-min. It was earlier, when she had asked him if he'd ever told his brother that Ji-yeon was good for him. The plane stopped. The seatbelt sign went off, and Claudette Bennett, 4 rows ahead, rose from her seat and stood in the aisle and looked back at her daughter, not with the managed expression of earlier. A sound like green, but with the stripped-down face of a woman who had put something down that she'd been carrying for a long time and wasn't yet sure what it felt like to stand up straight without it. Amara looked at her mother. Then Amara looked at Seong-hyun. I need you to tell me, she said, quietly, if anything about what I'm about to do is going to make what you're walking into more dangerous for you. He looked at her. Because you helped me, she said. For no reason that made any sense. And I'm not going to walk out of this gate and into whatever I have to deal with and leave you walking into something worse because of me. He thought about saying it wasn't her concern. He thought about saying that his situation existed entirely independently of anything that had happened on this flight. Both of these things were true, and neither of them was the honest answer to what she was actually asking. It doesn't make it more dangerous, he said. Telling your mother the truth about Whitmore changes nothing about what I'm walking into. She held his gaze, assessing. Okay, she said, okay. People around them were standing, pulling down bags, doing the collective improvisation of the aisle. The door was not yet open. They sat, both of them, in the last held moment of the flight, the 10 hours of pressurized air and shared honesty suspended above them like something that had not yet decided whether to resolve. Then Amara turned to the aisle. Claudette was already moving toward them, through the standing passengers, navigating the crowded aisle with the focused purpose of a woman who had decided what needed to happen next and was not willing to lose the moment to the chaos of disembarkation. She arrived at row 24. She looked at her daughter. Mom, Amara said, I need to tell you something about Damien. Claudette went still. Before we get off this plane, Amara said. Before we go through customs. I need you to hear it here, so you have time to decide what you want to do. The passengers around them moved and jostled and pulled luggage from overhead bins with the cheerful obliviousness of people who had arrived somewhere and were thinking about what came next. In the specific still point of row 24, a mother and daughter looked at each other across everything that had been said and unsaid across 3 years, and Claudette Bennett put her hand on the back of the seat in front of her and said, "Tell me." Seong-hyun stood, reached overhead, and removed both his bag and Amara's canvas tote from the overhead bin with the economical precision of someone creating space in a situation that needed it. And he stepped half into the aisle so that the two women had the best version of privacy that an aircraft cabin at the moment of landing could provide. Then his phone, which had reconnected to the ground network, the moment the wheels touched down, began to ring. Not his head of operations, Dae-jung. He stared at the screen for 1 full second. Then he looked back at Amara, who was turned toward her mother, the letter still held flat against her knee, beginning the sentence that would dismantle the last 2 years of careful manipulation in a way that could not be unmantled, and which would require everything her mother had, and everything she had, to survive cleanly. He stepped fully into the aisle. He answered. "Hyung." Dae-jung's voice was strained in a way that Seong-hyun recognized from 20 years of being his brother's older brother, the specific strain of someone trying to sound ordinary, while something in them was not ordinary at all. "I need to tell you something before you get here." The cabin door opened ahead. Cold Amsterdam air moved through the length of the plane. "Go ahead," Seong-hyun said. There was a pause on the line. In it, Seong-hyun heard the background noise of wherever his brother was, a hotel room. Probably the muffled distance of a call being made from somewhere a person had gone, specifically to make it, away from whoever else was present. "Ji-yeon's uncle is going to be at the wedding," Dae-jung said. "He arrived yesterday. I didn't know he was coming. Ji-yeon didn't tell me he was invited until last night. And when I asked her why..." A breath. "Hyung," she said, "he asked specifically whether you were attending." "That was 3 months ago." She said yes, because she thought he just wanted to meet the family. Another breath. "But I saw his name in your operations files 2 years ago." "I remembered it this morning," Seo Gwang-min. The passengers filed out around Seong-hyun. He stood motionless in the aisle, the phone at his ear, the cold air moving through the open door ahead. "Dae-jung," he said, "does Ji-yeon know who her uncle is?" The pause was 3 seconds long. "I don't know," his brother said. "I don't know, and I have to marry her in 14 hours, and I don't know." The passengers moved around him, like water around a stone. Seong-hyun stood in the aisle of the emptying aircraft, with the phone pressed to his ear and the cold Amsterdam air moving through the open door 40 feet ahead, and he did what he had trained himself to do. In the first 3 seconds of any crisis, he stopped. Not physically, he was already still. He stopped the part of his mind that wanted to immediately generate a plan, a set of moves. He let the information sit for 3 full seconds without touching it. His brother was getting married in 14 hours. His brother's future wife had an uncle who ran a mid-tier criminal network that had been positioning against Baekryun Holdings for 2 years. The uncle had specifically confirmed Seong-hyun's attendance 3 months ago. And Dae-jung didn't know whether the woman he was marrying had known any of this. "Hyung." Dae-jung's voice came through the phone with the particular quality of someone trying to stay controlled and losing the edges of it. "Say something. I'm thinking. I've been thinking all night. I need you to Dae-jung." Seong-hyun kept his voice level. "Where is Ji-yeon right now?" "Her family's suite. 3 floors above mine. We're doing the traditional thing, not seeing each other before the ceremony." A sound that might have been a short, humorless exhale. "Feels different now. Has she called you since last night?" "Once this morning. I didn't answer." "Good. Don't answer until I get there." He checked the time. They were 40 minutes from customs, another 20 at minimum to the hotel depending on traffic, and it was early enough that the Amsterdam streets were not yet heavy. "What hotel?" Dae-jung gave him the name. "Central Canal District, 15 minutes from the airport by car." Seong-hyun calculated automatically the wedding venue would be nearby. The family contingent would be distributed across at least 2 or 3 hotels given the size of Dae-jung's description of the guest list. And Seo Gwang-min would have had the better part of 3 months to arrange exactly where he wanted to be when this conversation happened. "Stay in your room," Seong-hyun said. "Don't talk to anyone from Ji-yeon's family until I arrive." Can you do that? Yes. But Hyung a pause, if she didn't know. If Ji Yeon genuinely didn't know who her uncle was in all of this. What does that mean? Song-hyun looked at the front of the plane. The open door. At the morning outside. It means she's innocent and we still have a problem, he said. One thing at a time. He ended the call. He turned back to row 24. Was standing. Now her canvas. Over one shoulder, the letter pressed flat inside it from the way she'd folded and placed it with careful deliberateness before standing. She was facing her mother, and whatever had been said between them in the last 4 minutes had left both of them in the specific stillness of people who have moved through something heavy and are now on the other side of it, not recovered, but through. Claudette's face was different, not destroyed. She was not a woman who came apart at the seams, visibly. But something structural had shifted in the way she held herself, the particular composure that had been her default register for the entire flight now rearranged into something less managed and more genuine. She was holding her daughter's hand. Amara was letting her. Song-hyun stepped back to the row. Amara looked at him. She read his face, he saw her do it, the quick and accurate sweep of someone who had spent the last 10 hours learning the vocabulary of his expression, and she said quietly, "It's worse." "Different," he said. "We need to move." Claudette looked at him. "What's happening?" "Something I need to handle when we land," he said. "I'll explain what I can when I can." He looked at Amara. "Whitmore, where is he?" "He was in first class. He'll be through the jetway ahead of us. He'll be through customs first. You have a window." He met her eyes directly. "Your mother needs to decide in the next 10 minutes what she intends to do. Whitmore will be through the terminal and to a car within 30 minutes if he moves quickly." Claudette's jaw set. The shift in her was immediate and visible, the particular hardening of a woman who has been told she has been maneuvered, who has absorbed the information, and who is now locating the version of herself that deals with this kind of thing. "I'm not letting that man walk out of this airport without." "Mom." Amara put a hand on her arm. "Carefully. Whatever you say to him, you say it because you've decided to, not because—" "I raised you for 34 years, Claudette said. "Not unkind. Just exact. I know the difference." She released her daughter's hand. Straightened. Looked at Sung-hyun with the assessing quality she'd had from the beginning. But different now, recalibrated. The assessment of someone who has revised their data set and is running a new conclusion. "Thank you," she said, "for telling her." He nodded once. Then Claudette Bennett picked up her bag and walked up the emptying aisle toward the jetway, with the measured pace of a woman who had decided exactly what she was going to do and was in no hurry because she had already done it in her mind. Amara watched her go. "She's going to find him," she said. "Yes. Is that going to be okay?" He thought about Damian Whitmore, the laptop, the lean, the 2 years of calculated patience. He holds paper leverage over a family trust. He has no other mechanism here. In a public airport terminal, with witnesses, he's not going to do anything except try to talk his way out of it. He paused. "Your mother doesn't seem like a woman who can be talked out of much." Amara looked at him. "No," she said, "she's not." They walked up the aisle. The jetway was cold and fluorescent. The artificial corridor between the aircraft and the terminal that belonged to neither. The transitional space where a person was no longer on the flight, but had not yet arrived. Seong-hyun moved through it behind Amara and tried to hold 3 things simultaneously, his brother alone in a hotel room 14 hours before his wedding. Co. Gwangmin, Co. Gwang enough to build a 3-month approach around a family event and was not going to be talked out of whatever he intended to achieve. And the woman 3 steps ahead of him, who had walked onto this aircraft carrying 1 problem and was walking off it carrying 3. She stopped at the end of the jetway, turned to him. "Tell me what you need," she said. He looked at her. "Not what you think I can handle," she said. "What you actually need right now." He had not been asked this question, not in any form, not by anyone who wasn't paid to ask it and act on the answer. He ran the calculation and found for the second time in 12 hours that the calculation was honest necessary, that the honest answer and the strategic answer were the same thing. "I need a car," he said, "and 40 minutes to my brother's hotel." And I need to know that you're safe before I walk into whatever that room contains. She held his gaze. I'm safe. My mother is handling her part. Go. Your bag, I have it. Go. He looked at her for 3 seconds. Then he moved. He was through the terminal in 11 minutes. He navigated immigration with the Korean diplomatic supplementary documentation that his head of operations had quietly arranged 18 months ago, which did not accelerate the process dramatically, but ensured there were no secondary questions. He cleared customs with nothing to declare except the weight of a situation that was assembling itself faster than he'd had time to fully map. His head of operations had a car waiting. The driver was a man named Bram, who worked with a security-adjacent logistics firm in Amsterdam that Bakerion Holdings kept on retainer. For exactly these circumstances, a quiet, competent man who understood that his job was to drive efficiently and hear nothing. He had the car at the arrival's pickup area, precisely where he said he would, and Seong-hyun got in without ceremony. Hotel Torenvaliet, he said. Canal District. Bram pulled out without speaking. Seong-hyun called his head of operations. Tell me everything you have on Gwangmin's current position in Amsterdam, he said without greeting. His head of operations, a man named Cha Woo-jin, who had been with him for 12 years and had the organizational habit of being 3 moves ahead of every conversation, said, he arrived day before yesterday. He's in the same hotel as the bride's family, suite on the 4th floor. He brought 2 people with him, both registered under different names, both with records in the Busan jurisdiction. He's had 3 meetings since arriving, 1 with a local contact whose name I'm still running, 2 in the hotel bar that were too public to be operational. He's establishing visibility, Seong-hyun said. He wants to be seen at the wedding. In photographs, with me in the same room. That's my read, Woo-jin said. A photograph of you and Gwangmin at the same family event is leverage he can use for years. It suggests a relationship, a negotiated peace at minimum, an alliance at the outside. Either way, it changes how every organization operating in his territory reads Bakerion's position. So his goal isn't physical today? No. His goal today is a photograph and a handshake, and the story that Kang Seong-hyun attended the wedding and didn't object to his presence. A pause. If you don't show, he still has the story. The chairman refused to come to his own brother's wedding when Gwangmin was there. That tells a story too. Seong-hyun looked out the car window at Amsterdam, moving past the canals, the narrow brick facades, the flat gray-white morning sky that gave the city its particular quality of light, diffuse and even, a sky that couldn't decide whether it intended to rain. And the 2 people he brought, he said, "They're insurance," Woo-jin said. Carefully, I don't believe his primary objective is violent. But I also believe he'd prefer to have options. The car crossed a canal bridge. Below it, the dark water moved with the slow certainty of something that had been moving through this city for centuries, before anyone had opinions about it. What does he actually want, Seong-hyun said, beyond the photograph? Distribution rights through the Incheon corridor. He's been locked out for 2 years. He wants a formal arrangement. Bakerion takes a percentage. Gwangmin gets movement through the logistics chain. Everybody calls it business. Woo-jin paused. It's not an unreasonable offer on paper. It's the framing that's the problem. He's using my brother's wedding as the negotiating table. Yes, which means any arrangement made in this context is made under pressure that I cannot admit to publicly, which means he has a version of the conversation to tell, and I have no clean counter-narrative. Seong-hyun let this sit for a moment. He's very patient. He is. The car turned onto a narrower street. The hotel appeared ahead, a converted canal house, 4 stories of dark brick with white trim, the kind of building that had been many things over 3 centuries, and was now, among other things, the location of his brother's wedding and Seo Gwangmin's 3-month calculation. I'm here, Seong-hyun said. Keep the line clear. One more thing, Woo-jin said. The woman Ji Yeon. Her connection to Gwangmin is through her mother's brother. Her mother died when Ji Yeon was 11. She was partly raised in Gwangmin's household. A pause. But her record education, work history, the last 6 years is entirely clean. There's nothing to suggest she's operational. My current assessment is she may not know the details of what her uncle does, but she grew up in proximity to it, which means she knows something. Seong-hyun got out of the car. The Amsterdam morning was cold in the specific way of Northern European spring, not brutal, but insistent, the kind of cold that found the spaces between clothing layers. He stood on the narrow pavement in front of the hotel for one moment and felt it. Then he went inside. Dae-jung opened the hotel room door before Seong-hyun finished knocking. He looked terrible in the way that only people who haven't slept out of fear look terrible, not the honest of it exhaustion, but the hollowed, slightly frantic quality of a person who has been awake, running the worst version of a scenario on a loop. He was in a white shirt, untucked, the kind of clothes a person puts on mechanically without thinking about them. He stepped back to let Seong-hyun in. The room was the expensive, calm disorder of someone who had been in it too long. Room service tray from the previous night on the table, jacket over the chair, phone on the bed, surrounded by the slight dent of someone who had spent hours sitting in one position. Seong-hyun came in, sat down in the chair across from the small table, looked at his brother. Dae-jung looked back at him. 14 months, Dae-jung said. I know, we're starting here. Right now, because I need you to understand that the reason this conversation is happening at all is because I didn't call you for 14 months and I should have. And that's not on you, that's on me. And if we're going to get through the next Dae-jung, Seong-hyun said it quietly, I know. His brother looked at him. Asound D4 years old. He was 34 and had the same eyes as their mother, the same quality of expression that couldn't fully harden no matter what was in front of it. He looked at Seong-hyun for a long moment, and then he sat down on the edge of the bed and put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands and stayed like that for 5 seconds. I love her, he said into his hands. That's the part that's making everything impossible. I love her, and I don't know what she knew, and I'm supposed to be in that room in 14 hours. Tell me exactly what she said. When you asked her about Gwangmin, Dae-jung lifted his face. She said he asked 3 months ago whether my brother was coming. She said yes because she thought it was a family thing. She wanted her family to meet mine. She said she didn't think. He stopped. She started crying. She doesn't cry easily. And I didn't know what to do with it, so I said I needed some air and I left, and I've been in this room since midnight. Did she try to stop you from leaving? No. Did she call you after? Well, I didn't answer. Seong-hyun processed this. The crying that didn't come easily. The single call. No pressure. No escalation. Either she was exactly what she appeared to be, a woman who had grown up adjacent to something she didn't fully understand, who had made a decision that seemed innocent and was now watching its consequences unfold, or she was very good at exactly this kind of moment. I need to meet with her, Seong-hyun said. Dae-jung looked up. What? Not to interrogate her. I need to see her face when I ask her directly what she knows about her uncle. He paused. I've been reading people in rooms for 20 years. I know the difference. And if she knew, Dae-jung's voice was very quiet. If she knew who he was and she didn't tell me. Seong-hyun looked at his brother. One thing at a time, he said. He called Woo-jin back. Can you get me into the bride's hotel without going through the lobby? Staff entrance on the east side of the building. I'll have someone meet you there in 12 minutes. He looked at Dae-jung. Stay here. Don't answer your phone unless it's me. Young, I'll be back in 30 minutes. He stood. And Dae-jung. Whatever I find out, I'm going to tell you the truth. All of it. I should have been doing that a long time ago. His brother looked at him with the eyes that couldn't harden. He nodded once. Seong-hyun left. The staff entrance on the east side of the building was exactly where Woo-jin said it would be, which was part of why Seong-hyun had kept him employed for 12 years. A sound like green wood splitting. A man in a hotel uniform met him there, not one of the hotel's actual employees, but someone who wore the uniform with sufficient comfort that the distinction wouldn't matter from a distance. He was shown up a service staircase to the 3rd floor. Room 312. He knocked. Ji Ji-yeon opened the door. She was 29 years old, which was younger than she carried her face, had the quality of someone who had learned to be calm in situations that didn't reward panic, a quality that was entirely genuine and entirely distinct from coldness. She was in a robe, hair down, the morning version of herself, rather than the prepared version. She had clearly not been sleeping. She looked at Seong-hyun with the particular quality of someone who has been expecting something, and is now calibrating whether this specific version of it is better or worse than what they imagined. "Seong-hyun-si," she said quietly. "Ji-hyun-si." He paused. "May I come in?" She stepped back. The room was tidier than Daejung's, the order of someone who controlled their environment as a coping mechanism. She sat at the small desk. He sat across from her in the chair by the window. The morning light from the canal below came through at a low angle, gray-white and flat. He looked at her. "Tell me what you know about your uncle," he said. No preamble, no warmth of approach to soften it. Not cruel, just direct, in the way that direct things were more respectful than circling. She held his gaze. Her hands were flat on the desk in front of her. "He raised me for 4 years after my mother died," she said. "It was the only family I had." A pause. "I know he's not legitimate. I've known that since I was 15. I don't know the details, and I have never want to know the details, because knowing the details would make it impossible to have any relationship with the only family I had left." "He used your wedding," Seong-hyun said. "I know," her voice was steady. "I understood that when you walked in the door just now. I didn't understand it 3 months ago when he asked. I thought he wanted to be part of something good." Her jaw tightened. "I should have asked more questions. Did you know who I was when you met Daejung?" "I knew his brother ran a large company in Seoul." She met his eyes. "I found out more specifically about 8 months into our relationship. And I made a decision to marry him anyway, because what I found out about you was entirely separate from who he was." "You didn't tell him?" "No." The word cost her something. He saw it. "I thought if I told him, he would think that I'd approached him with some kind of intention. And I hadn't. I had simply fallen in love with someone whose family situation was complicated, which he knew about mine, and I decided to let it stay quiet." She paused. "I was wrong. I know that. And I've been trying to find the moment to tell him for 4 months, and the moment kept receding." Seong-hyun looked at her hands, flat on the desk, steady. "Your uncle is going to be in that wedding venue today," he said. "I know. He's going to try to use the event to create a visible association between his organization and mine." "I know." Her jaw set harder. "He does this. He takes things that matter to people, and he makes them useful to himself. He's been doing it my entire life." Something shifted in her expression, not breaking, but the specific movement of someone who has been holding a position for a long time and is making the decision to let it go. "I'm going to call him." Seong-hyun said nothing. "I'm going to tell him that if he comes to that venue today, I will personally contact the appropriate authorities about every conversation I have ever accidentally been present for," she said. "He knows what that includes. He's always known I had that option. He trusted that I would never use it because I needed the connection." She looked at Seong-hyun directly. "I don't need it anymore. I have Daejung, and I will burn the bridge completely before I let my uncle turn the best thing in my life into an asset." Seong-hyun looked at her for a long time. He thought about the crying that didn't come easily, the single phone call, the tidier room, the hands that hadn't moved once. He said, "You understand that calling him changes your relationship to his network permanently?" "Yes. And you're prepared for what that might require going forward?" "I married into your family," she said. "I understood what that required." He held her gaze. Then he said, "Tell Daejung everything. Before the ceremony, all of it, what you knew, when you knew it, what you decided, and why. He needs to hear it from you." She nodded once, completely. "I'll go to him now," she said. "I'll call off the room," he said. "He won't know you're coming." She stood. She looked at him with the expression of someone who has done something they've been afraid to do and is now in the strange air of the aftermath, when the fear is gone and what's left is unclear. "Thank you," she said, "for coming here, for asking instead of assuming." "Don't thank me yet," he said. "Gwangmin still has to be managed." He left through the staff door. In the stairwell, he called Woo Jin. "Gwangmin, what's his current position?" "Hotel bar." "He's been there for 40 minutes. One of his people is in the lobby." "He knows I landed. He would have been notified." Yes. Seong-hyun came through the staff entrance onto the east pavement. The Amsterdam morning had clarified slightly. The low cloud moved and thin sunlight came through in patches, illuminating the canal in brief intervals. He stood on the pavement and made the calculation. He could avoid Gwang-min entirely. Leave him in the bar. Let Ji-yeon make her call. Let the threat dissolve through its own structural failure. Clean. Relatively safe. Or he could walk into that bar right now. He walked into the bar. It was a hotel bar in the mid-morning style, quiet, nearly empty. A sound like green wood splitting, the particular ambiance of a space that would be crowded in 12 hours, and was currently occupied only by the serious drinkers and the people who needed the cover of a public room for a conversation they didn't want overheard. Gwang-min was in a booth near the back wall. He was 61 years old, heavier than his photograph suggested, with the kind of face that had been handsome 20 years ago and had since settled into something that was merely formidable. He had a coffee in front of him and his phone face down on the table. He looked up when Seong-hyun walked in. He didn't look surprised. He looked the way a man looks when a thing he planned for has arrived on schedule. Seong-hyun sat down across from him. For 3 seconds, neither spoke. Then Gwang-min said in Korean, Chairman Kang, "You look tired." "You spent 3 months arranging this conversation," Seong-hyun said. "Let's not waste it on pleasantries." Gwang-min smiled with the portion of his face above his jaw. "Direct. I've always respected that about you." He lifted his coffee. "I have a proposal." "I know your proposal." "Then you know it's reasonable." "I know it's structured to appear reasonable in a context where refusing it creates a public narrative you can exploit, and accepting it creates a private obligation you can exploit." Seong-hyun kept his voice level. Conversational. The tone of a man discussing a quarterly report. Structure is clever. The execution is a mistake. Gwang-min set the coffee down. "Is that a threat?" "No. An assessment." Seong-hyun looked at him without warmth or hostility, the neutral, complete attention of someone who has long since moved past the performance of either. "You built your approach on 2 assumptions. First, that I wouldn't want to create a visible conflict at my brother's wedding. Second, that my connection to the event was strong enough to make me compliant." He paused. "Both assumptions relied on knowing my brother better than I do." Something shifted in Gwang-min's expression. Minimal. The slight recalibration of a man who has registered that the variable he was most certain about has changed. "Ji-yeon is a good woman," Gwang-min said carefully. "She is," Seong-hyun agreed. "Which is why she's talking to my brother right now, instead of talking to you." Gwang-min was still. "Whatever leverage you believed you had, through her access and her silence, that structure ended this morning," Seong-hyun said. "She made a decision that I think surprised even her." "She wouldn't." "She did. He let it sit." "So you're in Amsterdam at my brother's wedding with 2 associates who are going to spend the day in this hotel rather than in that venue, and you have no photograph, no handshake, no arrangement, and no narrative." He tilted his head slightly. "What you do have is a flight home and the option of taking it cleanly." Gwang-min looked at him. The formidable face was very still. "You'd let me walk away," he said. "You haven't done anything today that requires a different response," Seong-hyun said. "You attended a family wedding. You had coffee." He glanced at the cup. "Nothing actionable, and the Incheon corridor is not something we're discussing here." He paused. "There's a conversation to have about operational arrangements. It happens in Seoul, on neutral terms, without my brother's wedding as the table." He looked at Gwang-min steadily. "That's a better deal than you came here for." "I take it." Gwang-min sat with this. The bar was quiet around them. Behind the counter, a bartender was polishing glasses, with the careful inattention of someone who had been trained not to hear things. Outside the tall windows, Amsterdam moved past in its morning rhythm cyclists on the canal path, a boat engine, somewhere distant, the ordinary machinery of a city that had been managing complicated situations for 400 years and found most of them manageable. "You're more patient than your reputation," Gwang-min said, finally. "My reputation is useful," Seong-hyun said. "My patience is better." Gwang-min picked up his phone from the table. He looked at it for a moment. Then he put it in his pocket and stood. He looked down at Song-hyun with the expression of a man who has lost a specific contest and is assessing whether the loss is recoverable. "I'll be in Seoul in a week," he said. "I'll know when you land," Song-hyun said. Gwang-min walked out of the bar. Song-hyun sat in the booth for a moment. His hands were completely still on the table. His heartbeat was returning from the elevated pace of the last 90 seconds, not fear. The body's honest acknowledgement that some situations required more than others, and that a man who presented calm as his primary weapon still used energy to present it. He called Woo Jin. "Gwang-min is moving. Track his departure from the hotel. Make sure his 2 associates leave with him. Copy." He hung up. He sat for one more moment in the quiet of the bar. Then he called Amara. She picked up on the second ring. "Are you okay?" he said. A pause on the line. He heard background noise in an airport terminal, the specific resonance of an indoor public space. "I'm in the terminal. My mother found Damien at the gate for his connecting flight." A pause. It didn't go the way he'd planned. What did he do? He tried to reframe it. He said the lean was a protective measure, that he'd never intended to call it, that the whole thing was structured to give my family security. A short sound that wasn't quite a laugh. My mother told him she'd already spoken to a lawyer friend by phone during the flight, and that he would be receiving correspondence within 48 hours regarding the conflict of interest implied in his 2 years of pursuit, while holding undisclosed financial leverage over her family. Song-hyun sat with this. "Your mother called a lawyer during the flight," he said. "Apparently she has a college friend who practices financial law in London. She called from the aircraft Wi-Fi at 30,000 feet. A pause. "I underestimate her constantly." "Yes," he said. "You do." Silence on the line. "Then how is your brother?" "He's going to be okay." He looked at the window. Canal outside, at the thin sunlight moving across the water. "They both are, I think. It's not clean, but they're talking." "That's enough," she said. For now, he was quiet for a moment. "The wedding is at 4 o'clock, he said. Canalside venue. 10 minutes from this hotel." Another pause. Song-hyun, her voice was careful. "You don't have to. I asked you," he said, before we landed. "I asked you to come to the wedding. Not as anything invented. Just yourself." The line was quiet. "I know," she said. "I remember the answer," he said. "I'd still like one." The background noise of the terminal moved around her voice, the announcements, the crowds, very complicated noise of a place where people were arriving and departing and making decisions about where they were going next. "I need to get my mother to her hotel first," Amara said finally. She booked herself a room separately because she thought this trip was going to be about one thing, and it turned out to be about something completely different. "I can have a car there in 15 minutes. Of course you can." A pause. "Give me 2 hours. 2 hours, he said, and Song-hyun. "Yes. When I get there," she said, "you're going to tell me everything. Not the version you think I can handle. Everything." He looked at the water moving outside the window. "Yes," he said. He ended the call. He sat in the quiet bar of a hotel in Amsterdam, with the morning moving past the window, and thought about the last 24 hours. In the way that he almost never thought about time, not as a sequence of events to analyze and extract lessons from, a sound like green wood splitting, but as a thing that had happened that was still happening, and that had turned out to contain considerably more than any of the things he had boarded a commercial flight expecting. His phone vibrated. Woo Jin Gwangmin is checking out. Both associates with him. Car to the airport, booked under one of the aliases. Clear. He typed back, "Good work." Then, after a moment, he opened the messages thread with Dae-jung. He looked at the thread, the long gap, the unanswered message, the text from 14 months ago that had never received a reply. He typed, "I'm sorry it took me this long. I'll be at the venue at 4. Save me a seat in the front." He put the phone in his pocket and stood. Outside Amsterdam moved on without him in its flat, unhurried morning way. And somewhere across the city, Dae-jung was sitting in a hotel room with the woman he loved, and they were telling each other true things, which was harder than anything else, and the only thing that worked. And the wedding was in 6 hours. And for the first time since the aircraft door opened in Seoul, the night before, Kang Seong-hyun was not managing a situation. He was simply in one. His phone vibrated again. He looked at the screen. It wasn't Wu Jin, it wasn't Daejung. It was a number he didn't recognize. Amsterdam area code, and the message was 3 words. We need to talk. Below it, a second message arrived 4 seconds later. About your brother, and what Jian hasn't told you yet. He looked at the message for 10 seconds. Not because he needed 10 seconds to decide what to do. He needed the 10 seconds to do the thing he had been practicing, in small increments, for the last 24 hours to stop. To not immediately generate a response. To let the information exist for a moment, without being acted on. About your brother, and what Jian hasn't told you yet. Unknown Amsterdam number. No name. No follow-up in the 4 seconds since the second message arrived, which meant whoever sent it was waiting to see whether he responded before deciding how to proceed. That was the behavior of someone with information they believed was valuable. You didn't dump everything. Immediately, you offered the edge of it and waited. He typed back, "Who are you?" The response came in 40 seconds. Long enough to be considered. Short enough that the phone was already in hand. Someone who works for Gwangmin. Or worked. The distinction matters. Seong-hyun stood up from the booth. He moved to the far corner of the bar, away from the windows, the bartender, the door. His back to the wall. Old habit, reflexive. The body's geometry rearranging itself before the mind finished the instruction. He typed, "What do you want?" "Nothing from you. I want out. I've been with Gwangmin's operation for 4 years. There's a file 3 years of documentation I've kept. Financial records, communication logs, names, enough to put his network under for a decade. Pause between messages. I'll give it to the appropriate authorities. All of it. But I need confirmation that certain arrangements won't follow me when I leave. And you're telling me this because you just sat across from Gwangmin in that bar and you walked out clean. That means you have something on him. And because Ji-yeon knows I exist. She knows what I've been building. She told me 6 months ago that if she ever found a way out of her uncle's orbit, she'd take it. When you showed up at her door this morning, she called me." Seong-hyun stood with his back to the wall of the hotel bar and felt the situation reorganize itself the way situations did when a new variable entered, not a collapse, but a rotation, everything shifting to accommodate a different center of gravity. Ji-yeon had known about this person. She had called them this morning after he left her room, which meant that when she had said, "I'll burn the bridge completely," she had already known where the accelerant was. Called Wu Jin. "I need you to run a trace on a number." He read it out. "Now. And I need to know whether Gwangmin's car to the airport has actually left the hotel or whether that's what we were supposed to see." Wu Jin was quiet for 4 seconds. "Car left the hotel. It went 3 blocks and stopped. It's been stationary for 11 minutes. He didn't go to the airport." "No," Seong-hyun thought fast. Gwangmin had walked out of the bar with the face of a man accepting a loss. He had booked a car. He had loaded his associates. He had done everything that looked like departure. And then he had stopped 3 blocks away, waiting to see what happened next. Which meant the 3-word message "we need to talk" had been sent with Gwangmin's knowledge, or without it. And either answer changed the shape of the next hour in significant ways. "The number," Wu Jin said, "it's a prepaid. Purchased 2 days ago in Amsterdam. Can't get a name without more time. I don't have more time," he thought. "Get me the physical location of that phone right now." Pause. "It's in this hotel. 4th floor, Gwangmin suite." In the suite. So either Gwangmin had sent the message himself, using a clean phone, as a second approach after the bar conversation failed a more targeted piece of leverage involving something about Ji-yeon that Seong-hyun didn't yet have. Or one of his 2 associates was still in the suite while Gwangmin was in the car 3 blocks away, had sent it independently, which meant it was the person who had been building a file for 3 years and had just decided that this morning in this hotel was the moment to use it. He typed to the unknown number, "Are you alone in the suite?" "Yes." "Gwangmin thinks I'm packing his second bag. He doesn't know I'm doing this. What does he know about Ji-yeon that she hasn't told me?" Pause this time was longer, nearly a minute. The pause of someone deciding how much of their leverage to spend in a single message. She's been documenting him too, separately from me. For 2 years. She didn't know I was doing the same. Her documentation is more personal things she witnessed inside the family when she was a teenager. Testimony, essentially. She gave copies to a lawyer 18 months ago with instructions to release them if anything happened to her. Another message. Gwangmin found out 3 weeks ago. That's why he pushed for the wedding invitation. He needed her close. He needed to know whether she was still holding it or whether she'd already released it. Seong-hyun closed his eyes for 2 seconds. Ji-yeon had been carrying this for 2 years. She had met his brother, fallen in love with him, and she had been carrying a dead man's switch of documentation against her own uncle while planning a wedding, and she had not told Dae-jung because telling Dae-jung meant telling him everything, and telling him everything meant the life she was trying to build would have to survive contact with the life she was trying to leave. He opened his eyes. He typed, "What's your name?" "Park Hyun-soo." "Hyun-soo, here's what's going to happen. You're going to stay in that suite. You don't leave. You don't contact Gwangmin. You don't respond to him if he calls. I'm going to send someone to you in 10 minutes. You give them the file. Everything. And then you walk out of that hotel through the staff entrance and it's on the east side, and there will be a car waiting. You understand." A pause. "And the arrangements I need. I'll make one call. You won't be followed. That's all I can guarantee. I don't own the legal exposure, but I can guarantee the other kind." Another pause. Longer, okay. He called Woo Jin for the 3rd time in 15 minutes. 4th floor suite. Man named Park Hyun-soo. He's going to give you a file, physical and digital. You take it. You put him in a car to wherever he wants to go, and you don't ask questions about the destination. Then you get that file to the Financial Crimes Unit contact in Seoul. A beat. The one we've never used. That's a significant step, Woo Jin said carefully. I know. You're handing Gwangmin to the authorities. I'm giving them the materials to make their own decision. He paused. Which is different. And cleaner. And the car that's been sitting 3 blocks from this hotel. Seong-hyun thought about Gwangmin sitting in the back of a car 3 blocks away, waiting for the shape of the next move to become visible. A man who had spent 3 months building an approach around a family wedding and had watched it fail, who was now waiting with the patience of someone who understood that situations were rarely over just because a single conversation had ended. Leave it, he said. When his man doesn't come down with the bag, he'll understand the calculation has changed. He'll make the smart decision. He paused. Gwangmin is many things. He's not stupid. He hung up. He stood in the corner of the bar for 30 seconds longer. Then he went upstairs to his own room booked by Woo Jin that morning. 3rd floor, single bed, the kind of room that was about function rather than comfort. And he sat on the edge of the bed and called Dae-jung. His brother answered on the first ring. She's here, Dae-jung said. His voice had a different quality now, still stripped, still exhausted. But underneath it, something that hadn't been there before. The sound of a person who has been afraid of a conversation and has now had it. We talked for 2 hours. I know, Seong-hyun said. There's more. He told his brother everything, not a managed version. All of it, Gwangmin's approach. The file, Ji-yeon's documentation, the dead man's switch with the lawyer. The 2 years she had spent building a protection structure around herself, and the 18 months Gwangmin had known about it, and the 3 weeks of knowing that had produced the wedding invitation and the entire sequence of events that had landed them in Amsterdam on this specific morning. Dae-jung was quiet for a long time after. She told me about the documentation, he said finally. When we talked this morning. Not all the details, but the shape of it. A pause. She cried again. I don't think she knew she was going to tell me. It came out in the middle of something else. How did you respond? I didn't know what to say. His voice was rough. So I didn't say anything for a while. And then I said I wished she had told me earlier, and I understood why she hadn't, and those 2 things can both be true. Seong-hyun sat with that. Yes, he said, they can. Are you okay? Dae-jung said it with the specific directness of someone who has decided that certain questions were not optional anymore. Not the situation, you. Seong-hyun looked at the wall of the hotel room. At the anonymous, adequate neutrality of a room that had been prepared for a person who had not yet arrived and would be gone tomorrow. I met someone on the flight, he said. Silence. Tell me, Dae-jung said. And he did. Not all of it. Enough of it. He told his brother about the woman in seat 24C who had asked him to be her husband, and the 10 hours that had followed, and the ring that was still on his left hand, and the phone call he had made from the terminal, and the 2 hours she had asked for. When he finished, Dae-jung was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She sounds like someone who would tell you the truth even when it's inconvenient." Yes, Seong-hyun said. She would. A pause. "I want to meet her. The wedding is at 4. I know when my wedding is." And there it was not a laugh exactly, but the sound adjacent to one, the first evidence in this entire conversation, that his brother was still inside the situation rather than crushed under it. "Bring her." She said she needed 2 hours. Then she has 2 hours. It's 11:15, a beat. Be at the venue by 3:30. And Hung, wear something other than that gray suit you always travel in. Seong-hyun looked at the gray suit jacket folded over the chair in the corner. "It's a good suit," he said. "It makes you look like you're attending a board meeting. This is a wedding." A pause. Ji-yeon's dress is ivory. "Try not to match the groom." He ended the call. He sat for a moment with the phone in his hand. Then he did something he had not done in a very long time. He sat on the edge of a bed in a hotel room and did nothing for 3 full minutes. No phone, no brief, no calculation. He sat and looked at the window and the canal light coming through it and let the last 24 hours simply exist without being processed. It was harder than it sounded, but he managed it. At 1:40 in the afternoon, a car arrived at the hotel. Seong-hyun was in the lobby when it pulled up, and when the door opened and Amara stepped out, he saw her before she saw him, one unguarded moment in which he observed her as she was, rather than as she presented herself. The specific version of a person that existed in the half-second before they knew they were being watched. She was tired. The flight, the terminal, the 2 hours with her mother in a hotel room on the other side of the city, all of it was visible in the way she held herself, the slight heaviness of someone running on the last of their reserves. She had changed clothes dark blue, simply cut, the kind of clothing that had been chosen in a hurry, but had been chosen well. She had the canvas tote over one shoulder. She looked at the hotel facade, and then she looked at the lobby through the glass, and she found him. He raised his hand slightly, not a wave, just an acknowledgement. She came in. They stood in the lobby looking at each other. And it was briefly strange in the way that things were always briefly strange. When a context changed, they had spent 10 hours learning each other in the specific intimacy of adjacent seats and shared altitude, and now they were on the ground. In ordinary light, in a city neither of them was from, and the transfer required a moment of adjustment. "You look better," she said. "You look worse," he said. She almost smiled. "Thank you. My mother cried for 40 minutes and then made 2 phone calls and ordered room service for 4 people, even though it was just the 2 of us, which is how I know she's going to be okay. And you," she looked at him, "I need coffee, and you need to tell me what happened after you left the airport." He told her over coffee in the hotel restaurant, a corner table, window seat, the canal outside doing its slow and unhurried thing. He told her about Jian and the conversation in room 312. He told her about the bar and Guangmin, and the 3 words that had arrived on the unknown number afterward. He told her about Park Yun-soo and the file on the car to the airport, and the larger file, now in transit to a contact in Seoul. She listened without interrupting. This was a quality he had noticed on the flight, and noticed again now she did not manage the pace of other people's speech, did not insert herself into the gaps. She let the whole thing arrive before she responded to any of it. When he finished, she looked at the canal for a moment. "Ji-yeon," she said. "She spent 2 years carrying that." Yes, and she never told him because she didn't want to destabilize something good with the full weight of where she'd come from. "Yes, I understand that," Amara said. Not with self-pity. Just the accurate placement of a feeling she recognized. A sound like green wood splitting. The things you don't say because you're afraid the saying of them will cost you the thing you're trying to protect. He looked at her. "My father's business," she said. "I knew it was struggling for a year before my mother did. He told me because I asked, and he made me promise not to worry her. She held her coffee cup without drinking from it. I kept that promise for a year, and it cost me something I didn't get back. Because keeping it meant pretending with her, and pretending with her meant we were both a little more alone than we needed to be. She set the cup down. Secrets are expensive, even the ones you keep out of kindness. He was quiet. Is the file enough? She asked. To actually stop Guangmin. If it reaches the right people, yes. 3 years of documentation from someone inside the operation, combined with Ji Yeon's 2 years of independent testimony. That's not a case that gets dismissed on procedural grounds. He paused. It takes time. These things always take time. But Guangmin spent the last 3 months building a move that failed completely, and now there's a file moving toward authorities in 2 jurisdictions. His operational calculus changes. He'll know it was you. He'll know it was the situation, Seong-hyun said. I didn't generate the file. I didn't generate Ji Yeon's decision. I moved what was already in motion toward its logical conclusion. She looked at him with the level, clear quality of attention that he had by now stopped being surprised by and started simply expecting. Is that how you justify it to yourself? Or is that actually what happened? Both, he said. In this case, they're the same. She considered this. And Guangmin's offer, the Incheon corridor, you said you'd hear him in Seoul. I said it to give him a clean exit. You won't hear him. No. Why not? The offer itself. The offer is acceptable on paper, he said. The man who made it is not someone I can build a stable arrangement with. A person who uses a family wedding as a negotiating table has a fundamental problem with the concept of boundaries, and people who can't hold a boundary in one context can't hold it in any context. He paused. I've learned that over time, at significant cost. Amara looked at him. That's about more than Guangmin, she said. Yes, he said. It is. She didn't pursue it. She picked up her coffee and drank it, and they sat for a while with the canal outside, doing what canals do, moving, unhurried, carrying everything that fell into it without comment. The wedding is at 4, he said. I know, you told me. My brother wants to meet you. She looked at him. You told him? Yes, a pause. What did you tell him? He thought about how to answer this. He settled on, enough. She held his gaze. Whatever the word contained, she accepted it, not blindly, but with the specific acceptance of someone who understands that full disclosure was not always instantaneous, and that enough from this particular person was not a small thing. Okay, she said. Tell me what to expect. At the venue, he told her. The canal-side location, the mixed Korean and Dutch guest list, the ceremony structure, the expected number of people, the fact that Ji Yeon's family contingent would be smaller than anticipated, given the departure of its most complicated member. He told her that Dae-jung would be nervous in the particular way of people who are always completely certain about the most important things and uncertain about the presentation of them. He told her that Ji Yeon was, in his assessment, one of the more genuinely strong people he had encountered in recent memory, and that he intended to tell her so directly, if the occasion allowed. Amara listened. Then she said, And your brother, what's he actually like? He thought about Dae-jung, the Paris years, the architectural drawings that were still in a roll since somewhere in their mother's house in Seoul. The way he laughed too loud for formal rooms, completely genuine in all rooms. The 4 years of every morning decisions. The call at 11 at night, not the chairman. You. He's the best person I know, Seong-hyun said. And I've spent most of my adult life treating that fact as a liability instead of what it is. Amara was quiet for a moment. What is it? She said. The only thing that actually worked out. She looked at him for a long time. Then she set her coffee down and said, Let's go to a wedding. The venue was 10 minutes away along the canal, a converted warehouse from the 19th century that had been made into an event space with the Dutch genius for taking industrial bones and making them beautiful without erasing what they were. High ceilings, exposed brick, the long windows looking out over the water. The late afternoon light came through at an angle that turned everything amber, and the canal below the windows caught it and threw it back. So the whole room existed in a warmth that was partly light and partly the specific warmth of a place where something mattered was about to happen. They arrived at 3:40, Dae-jung, was standing near the entrance with his jacket on, and his collar slightly wrong, and the expression of a man who was genuinely, comprehensively happy in a way that had survived a very difficult night, which was perhaps the truest form of happiness there was. He saw Seong-hyun. He crossed the distance in 8 steps, and he did not shake his hand or bow or perform any of the registered greetings that existed in the space between brothers who had been apart for 14 months. He hugged him, hard, the hug of someone who had been waiting to do it for a long time and had decided that the wait was over and no further processing of the decision was required. Seong-hyun stood for half a second, the half-second of a body that had spent 20 years learning not to be held, and then he put his arms around his brother and held on. They stayed like that for a moment. When they separated, Dae-jung's eyes were wet in the way he'd always been unable to hide and had always been unable to be embarrassed by. He looked at Seong-hyun, and then he looked at Amara, who was standing 3 steps back, giving them exactly the right amount of space, and his expression shifted into the open, immediate warmth of someone who formed genuine impressions quickly. "You're the teacher," he said. "Marine biology," she said. "The starfish story," Dae-jung said. "He told me." He extended his hand. "I'm Dae-jung, no," she said. "He told me too." "Good things, I hope." She glanced at Seong-hyun. "He said you were the best person he knew." Dae-jung looked at his brother with an expression that was complicated and immediate. Then he said quietly, "He's never said that to me." "No," Seong-hyun said. "I should have." The 3 of them stood in the amber light of the canal-side venue, and the moment had the specific quality of things that arrived, without being perfectly engineered, slightly uneven, slightly exposed, more real for both of those reasons. Then Ji Yeon appeared at the interior door. She was in the ivory dress, and she looked like what she was, a woman who had spent 2 years carrying something extremely heavy and had set it down that morning, and the setting down was visible in the way she stood. The specific posture of someone learning, again, how to hold themselves without the weight. She looked at Seong-hyun. He nodded once. She nodded back the nod of 2 people who had understood each other in a room that morning and were now confirming that the understanding held. Then she looked at Dae-jung, and her expression did the thing expressions do when they stop performing and become entirely themselves, and Dae-jung looked at her the same way. And whatever had been broken open between them in the last 6 hours was there in both their faces, not healed, not erased, but held between them openly, which was different and better than the alternative. Seong-hyun looked away from them. Amara was watching the canal through the long windows. She had her tote against her side and the amber light on her face, and she was doing the thing she did when something mattered to her, going very still, taking it in without commentary, letting it be what it was without requiring it to be anything else. He walked to where she was standing. She didn't turn when he arrived. She kept watching the water. "The light does something here," she said. "In the afternoon. The way it hits the water and comes back up. In Atlanta we had light like this, maybe 3 weeks since October." She paused. "My students would spend the whole lab period distracted. I always let them. Some things are worth being distracted by." He stood beside her. They watched the canal for a while. Splitting. The guests were beginning to arrive, the specific human sound of a spaced filling, with people who were connected to each other in the layered way of families and friends. The overlapping conversations and the overlapping conversations of people who hadn't seen each other in a long time and were finding their footing. "I have to tell you something," Amara said. He waited. She turned from the window and looked at him directly, the way she always did when she had organized a thought to its final form. "I don't know what this is. What's been happening in the last however many hours? I don't know what to call it or what it is or what it becomes when we get on our respective flights in 2 days. She paused. "But I know that I got on a plane yesterday trying to survive a 10-hour flight, and what actually happened was something completely different. And I spent 34 years being told that the things I wanted were the wrong things. And standing here right now feels like the first time in a long time that I'm standing somewhere because I chose to be." He listened. "I'm not asking for anything," she said. "I'm just telling you that." He looked at her. He thought about the ring on his left hand, which was still his brother's gift from 20 years ago, which had served last night as evidence of a marriage that didn't exist and was still on the same finger because he hadn't thought to move it back, and possibly because some part of him had noticed that thought and declined to act on it. "I'm going to Seoul in 2 days," he said. "I know. And you go back to D.C. "Yes, to Marcus and the starfish in the 10th grade. She almost smiled. "And the 10th grade. And he stopped. Started differently. "I've spent 20 years making decisions about what was safe for people without asking them. I ended a 14-month silence with my brother this morning by letting Ji-yeon make a decision I would have made for her if I'd moved 3 seconds faster." He paused. "I'm trying to learn that asking is better than deciding." She waited. "So I'm asking," he said. "Not for a decision right now. Not for a label or a plan or a commitment that makes sense on paper. I'm asking whether, when I'm in Seoul doing whatever the next version of my life turns out to be, I can call you." She looked at him for a long moment. "You can call me," she said. The ceremony began 20 minutes later. They sat in the second row, Seong-hyun and Amara, side by side, because Dae-jung had said front row, and the front row had been given to Ji-yeon's remaining family, which was smaller and more complicated and more genuinely present than it had been 48 hours ago. The officiant spoke in Dutch and Korean both, a practical solution to a binational guest list that produced the slightly surreal effect of every sentiment arriving twice, in 2 languages, which turned out not to be redundant but resonant, as if each repetition confirmed the other. Ji-yeon walked in. Dae-jung watched her come down the aisle, with the face of a man who has been afraid all night, and is now at the actual moment no longer afraid. Not because the fear resolved, because she arrived. Because the thing he'd been afraid of losing was here, was present, was walking toward him in ivory, in the amber canal light, and the fear had nothing left to occupy. She reached him. They stood facing each other. Song-hyun watched his brother's hands, when Ji-yeon's hands found them the way Dae-jung held on, and the way Ji-yeon held on back, and the specific quality of 2 people who have been through something difficult together and are choosing to be here anyway, which was the truest version of choosing there was. He felt Amara's shoulder against his, the slight warmth of contact in the cool of the high-ceilinged room. She didn't move away. He didn't move away. The officiant spoke, and the canal light moved, and the water outside continued its slow and unhurried work, and the vows that Dae-jung and Ji-yeon had written themselves in the long, private hours of a relationship that had been many things, before it became this, were spoken in a room full of people who had arrived from different directions, and were now briefly in the same place at the same time for the same reason. After, when the formalities had concluded and the venue had reorganized itself into the looser, warmer configuration of celebration, Song-hyun found Ji-yeon near the window. She was watching the canal, the same view Amara had been watching earlier, as if the water had a quality that drew people who were in the middle of something large. He stood beside her. "Woo-jin confirmed the file arrived," he said. "I know. He called me." She was quiet for a moment. "It's strange. I spent 2 years building that documentation because I needed to know it existed. I never actually thought I'd use it. What changed?" She looked at the water. "You came to my door this morning. And instead of making a decision about me, you asked." A pause. Nobody from your world had ever done that before. He thought about what Amara had said to him. In the terminal, before the car, not what you think I can handle, what you actually need. "It's a recent development," he said. Ji-yeon almost smiled. Then quietly, "He's going to need you." Dae-jung. "Whatever comes from the file, the legal process, the exposure, the media, if it reaches that. He's going to need his brother." "I know." "Don't disappear again," she said. Not accusing, just true. "No," he said, "I won't." She looked at him. Whatever the assessment was, she seemed to complete it. Because she nodded once the same nod as that morning, the confirmation of an understanding. And then she moved back toward the celebration, toward her husband, toward the specific, complicated gift of the life she had chosen. Song-hyun stayed at the window for a moment. He took the ring off his left hand. He held it for a moment, the platinum band, his brother's gift, 20 years old, and worn at the edges in the way that things worn daily were worn. He looked at it in his palm. Then he transferred it to his right hand, where it had always lived, where it belonged, a gift, not a claim, a piece of his brother's history that he'd been carrying for 20 years and would carry 20 more. He found Amara with Claudette, of all configurations, the two of them at a table near the back with glasses of sparkling water, and from the quality of the conversation, it had clearly moved past the initial introductions into something more substantive, because Claudette had a particular attentiveness when a conversation had found its actual subject. He watched Amara say something that made her mother stop, look at her, and then look at the table with the expression of someone receiving information that was adjusting something internal. He didn't interrupt. He sat at the adjacent table and waited and watched his brother across the room, Dae-jung, laughing at something his university friend had said, Ji-yeon's hand in the crook of his arm. A sound then two of them moving through their own wedding with the particular ease of people who had been honest with each other that morning and were now carrying it differently than they'd carried everything before. Claudette stood eventually, touched Amara's hand, and moved toward the area where the other family members were gathering. Amara turned and found Seong-hyun at the adjacent table. She picked up her glass and moved to sit across from him. She told me something, Amara said. Your mother. She said that when I was 6 years old, I used to collect things from outside and put them in my room. Rocks, feathers, a piece of colored glass I found in the street. I had a whole shelf of them. She looked at the glass in her hand. She said she never understood it until tonight. That I've always done this, found things other people walked past and decided they were worth keeping. Seong-hyun looked at her. She was talking about you, Amara said, in the way that mothers talk about things, without saying them directly. He was quiet for a moment. Your mother, he said, is more perceptive than she lets on. She lets on quite a lot, Amara said. You just have to know where to look. The celebration moved around them. Music from somewhere live, a duo near the far wall, something that moved between jazz and something older and without a clear category. Conversations overlapping. The particular sound of a room full of people who have arrived for a shared reason and found in the arrival that the reason is worth the distance they traveled. Tell me something, Amara said, about what it looks like. The next version of what you. She held his gaze. The next version of Kang Seong-hyun, after Gwangmin, after the file, after Amsterdam. He thought about this seriously, the way she'd asked it seriously. Bakrion Holdings has a legitimate side that's actually quite large, he said. It doesn't require the other part to function. It has required it historically because the other part provided certain protections and certain leverage. But the protection model changes over time, and the leverage is expensive. He paused. There are parts of what I've built that I'm proud of, and parts that I've maintained because I inherited them, and changing them seemed harder than continuing. What made it seem hard? Fear, he said, without dressing. Not of the change itself. Fear of what it would look like to the people who've known me as one thing, to change into something else. As if the change would retroactively make the before version dishonest. Does a starfish become dishonest when it grows back an arm? She said. He looked at her. It held on, she said. That was the point. Not what it looked like while it was holding on. He was quiet for a long moment. The music shifted. The duo moved into something slower, and the room moved with it, the particular adjustment of a celebration, finding its later register, the high energy of the beginning, settling into something that would sustain the rest of the night. Dae-jung appeared at their table. He sat down without ceremony, still in his wedding jacket, the collar still slightly wrong. And he looked at his brother and the woman across from him with the expression of someone who has had the best and most difficult day of his life, and is now in the particular exhausted piece of its aftermath. Ji-yeon wants to know if you'll come to dinner tomorrow, he said to Amara. She says she has questions about marine biology, and I have no idea if that's a real thing or a conversation strategy, but either way she means it. Amara looked at Seong-hyun. He looked at her. I can change my flight, she said. If the aquarium in Amsterdam is worth seeing, there's one on the west side of the city, he said. I don't know if it's worth seeing. Everything is worth seeing, she said. If you look at it right. He held her gaze. Then to Dae-jung she'll be there. Daejung looked at his brother with the eyes that couldn't fully harden and the expression of someone who has wanted something for a long time and has watched it quietly begin. "Good," he said simply. He stood, touched Seong-hyun's shoulder once brief, genuine. The contact of 20 years and 14 months, and everything that had been said that morning, and everything that didn't need to be said now. And then he went back to his wife. The evening continued. The canal outside went dark slowly, the way Northern European evenings went dark, not suddenly, but through a long series of diminishments, each one slight, until the light was something else entirely, and the water caught the reflections of the venue windows instead of the sky. Seong-hyun and Amara stayed past the point where staying was required. They stayed because there was no particular reason to leave, and because Daejung and Ji Yeon kept catching their eyes from across the room with the pleased, proprietary satisfaction of people who believe they have witnessed the beginning of something, and possibly they had. Later, when the music had slowed to its end, and the guests had thinned to the inner circle of family and closest friends, Amara stood at the long window looking at the dark canal, the tote on her shoulder, the letter from her mother, inside it, in the place where she'd put it carefully, the place where things were kept. Seong-hyun stood beside her. They watched the water. "Starfish," he said. She looked at him. "The one Marcus held." He paused. "You said it was holding on, yes." He wasn't only talking about the starfish. "No," she said, "he wasn't. Neither were you." She turned from the window and looked at him directly, in the specific way she had looked at him across 10 hours of pressurized air and the particular honesty of altitude, the look that assessed and received and did not manage what it found. "No," she said, "neither was I." Outside, the canal moved in the dark the way it had been moving for 400 years, slow, unhurried, carrying everything that was given to it without being changed by any of it, and going forward, always forward, toward whatever came next. Inside, two people who had been holding on for a long time stood in the amber light of their first night, on the ground, and looked at each other, and did not look away.